Chapter 251. Goliath gently stroked his beard and said, "No matter who inherits the throne, we must first maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire and control the situation. The assassination of the emperor is a major event. If we don't deal with it well, it is likely to lead to a mutiny. In order to prevent internal strife, we must show our strength to the outside world and guard against sneak attacks. It is necessary to deploy a large number of troops to suppress the Assyrian Empire. As for whether the war will start or not, it depends on the attitude of the Kingdom of Babylon." Prince Binut nodded and said, "Once the news of Seneca's assassination spreads, the people of Babylon will be greatly encouraged. The Assyrian Empire's military expansion has reached its limit. The large areas of territory behind the front line need to be consolidated. In fact, it is impossible to launch a large-scale campaign at this time. This is something that the leaders of the various kingdoms can see. But the feelings of the common people and the soldiers are different. Seneca's cruelty is terrifying. When it is said that he will lead his army to attack, the people of the city will flee before the battle even starts. The city's garrison will also collapse at the first touch. Now that the situation has changed, it is time to rally the people's confidence and stabilize the line of defense at the Lys River. I will send messengers in the name of the king to express my condolences to the Assyrian Empire and Queen Samir. For the time being, we will not provoke them and use this as an excuse to start a war." Goliath nodded and said, "That's good. Since you have made such arrangements, our goal of assassinating Seneca has been achieved. I left Saya in the name of visiting the city of Salem, but I went all the way to Lys and brought High Priest Saya and my student Walter here. We have been away for a long time. We should go back now." The Supreme Mage was very straightforward. After saying this, he got up and left. The crowd walked out of the curtains together to see him off. Before leaving, Goliath looked back at Binut and Princess Sisela with a meaningful look. At last he said, "I heard that Hammurabi too is very ill. No matter who inherits the throne of Babylon, take care of yourself. The turmoil on the continent will not end here." Everyone stood in the open space and watched Goliath and Walter leave on the flyer, but Rolio didn't go with them and still stood behind Amon. Princess Sisela suddenly asked, "Binut, you said that you don't want to provoke the Assyrian Empire right now, but the assassin is Gil. Everyone knows that he is the hero of the Kingdom of Babylon. The Assyrian Empire can't just let the assassin go. What do you plan to do?" Prince Binut gritted his teeth and said, "That's not easy. Let's just say that we can't find Gil. No one knows his whereabouts. In terms of diplomacy, we can just give them face and step down." Would anyone really dare to go deep into the Kingdom of Babylon to find Gil? With a hero like Gil, the morale of the army and the people will be greatly boosted. The Kingdom of Babylon is not really afraid of war. Gilgamesh waved his hand and said, "If the Assyrian Empire really wants to track down the murderer, just tell them that the Kingdom of Babylon will assist in the investigation. Let them send someone to look for me. Whether they can find the murderer or not will depend on luck. Ever since I left Uruk, I have nothing to do with the affairs of the other kingdoms on the continent. Killing Seneca was just a favor to Ammonius. Goliath is gone and so am I." Princess Sisela pouted. "Gil, are you going to leave me alone again?" Gilgamesh turned to her and said, "It's up to your highness to decide whether I'm going alone or not." Prince Binut hurriedly interrupted. "My aunt, the king is seriously ill. The kingdom is still waiting for you to return and take charge. When the current storm is over, you and Gil can show yourselves in public and become the heroes of the kingdom. When that time comes." Princess Sisela interrupted him. "My nephew, after what you've gone through, I have nothing to do with the court anymore. I hope you can become a successful king in the future." After saying that, he walked to Gilgamesh's side and said, "Gil, take me with you." Gilgamesh made an inviting gesture. "My princess, please get in the carriage." Princess Sisela said again, "Gil, please wait." She went back to the curtain and filled a cup with wine. She held the cup with both hands and walked to Madanzo. She bowed and handed the cup to him. "My hero, I don't know how to express my gratitude to you. Please let Sisela give you a cup of wine before you leave." Madanzo's expression was indescribable. He took the cup and drank it in one gulp. Then he waved his hand and said, "Your Highness, I wish you and Gil a safe journey. Gilgamesh drove the carriage away with Princess Sisela. They soon disappeared into the distant mountains. Since then, they had become a legend on the continent. No one knew where Gil and Sisela went, but different stories were told in different places. As they were leaving, Madanzo looked at the disappearing carriage and the lonely white horse in the clearing. He seemed to be talking to himself. No matter what I do, I'm not him. His voice sounded a little lonely. Amon put a hand on his shoulder and said with a smile, Of course you're not him. You're yourself in this world. But after all, you have witnessed their story. Do you understand? Hearing this, Madanzo seemed to be deep in thought. He lowered his head and seemed to be in a trance for a moment. Amon's hand, which was on his shoulder, grabbed his arm. He smiled and said, Do you feel it? Your time is up. What did Amon mean? Time is up. Madanzo's magic power and cultivation had reached a sufficient level. At this moment, he finally experienced the never-ending state of mind, and was about to face the test of breaking through to the 9th level. Amon ordered Madanzo to return to the Garden of Eden immediately, and not to return to the human world, until he passed the test. Elmar and Rulia were to escort him. Elmar asked, Ammonius, we're all leaving. Where are you going? Ammonius smiled and said to Prince Binut, I've been to Babylon City before, but I didn't have the chance to climb the famous Tower of Babel. This time I want to visit it again. I wonder if the guards at the bottom of the tower will let me? Binut was startled, but then he realized that Amon was going to see Marduk. It was said that by climbing to the top of the Tower of Babel outside Babylon City, Marduk's palace on earth could directly summon the god. This was only a legend, and no one had the guts to try it. But Amon, as a god, could go to Marduk. He bowed and replied, Are you going to Babylon City? It's my honor to be with you. Amon went to Babylon City accompanied by Prince Binut, while General Robin stayed on the west bank of the Lys River to lead the army in defense. He was not only the head of the Babylon Legion, but Binut also temporarily appointed him as the commander-in-chief of the defense line. As for Binut himself, he couldn't stay on the front lines because the king was seriously ill, and he had to be ready to inherit the throne at any time. Princess Sisela had already given up the idea of fighting for the throne, and left with Gilgamesh. No matter what Hammurabi Tuswal was, at present, only Prince Binut could control the Babylon kingdom. Goliath's judgment was right. On the second day after Seneca's assassination, the Assyrian Empire urgently mobilized its army to the Lys River to confront the Babylon army led by General Robin across the river. Both sides were on high alert. At present, the two countries were in a state of peace, so this kind of mobilization was unusual. Moreover, the Assyrian army seemed to be in a hurry. On his way back to Babylon City, Prince Binut had been paying attention to the Assyrian Empire's news. There was no way the Assyrian Empire wouldn't announce something as big as Seneca's assassination. If Gilgamesh was exposed as the assassin, Prince Binut was already prepared to deal with the Assyrian emissaries. 3 days later, the news of Seneca's assassination came. It was an announcement from Queen Samir, but the content of the announcement surprised Binut. It was said that the invincible Assyrian Emperor Seneca was seriously injured in a battle, and was currently recuperating in the city of Lys. As for his enemy, the Assyrian Empire's announcement did not mention Gilgamesh, nor did it mention Goliath or Madanzo. It only mentioned the name of a god, Ammonius. Seneca was clearly sent flying by Gilgamesh, and Amon didn't even lay a finger on him. How did Amon get the blame? Samir naturally had her reasons for making such an announcement. No matter who she hated in her heart, her priority was to maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire. She couldn't allow the empire to fall into chaos because of Seneca's assassination. From the Assyrian Empire's announcement, it didn't mention how serious Seneca's injuries were. It gave the impression that he would recover after some treatment. In order to control the Assyrian Empire, Samir had to rely on Seneca's name to protect the emperor's glory. Only when the invincible Assyrian emperor was injured by a god would his prestige, and the prestige of the empire, be tarnished. Even if it wasn't Amon who did it, it had to be Amon. The announcement stated that there was an earth-shattering battle between Emperor Seneca and Ammonius. Although Seneca was injured, he managed to severely injure the god and forced him to flee. There was some truth in this. Amon was indeed injured, and he damaged his own mana to escape to the west bank of the Lys River. But that was not Seneca's doing. As for not mentioning Goliath's name, there was another reason. If the Assyrian Empire didn't pursue the matter, where would the dignity of the empire go? But if they pursued the matter, with Goliath's status in the Hittite kingdom, it would mean that the Assyrian Empire didn't have the strength to attack Hittite. Although Emperor Sinek had this plan, it was only a wish for the future. Sinek was extremely cruel and infamous. Countless people on this continent hated him to the bone. No matter who succeeded in assassinating Sinek, they would become a hero who was praised and sincerely thanked by the people. They would have unimaginable glory. But now, all the glory belonged to Amon alone. Even his disciple Madanzo didn't get a share. Who knew what kind of bitter smile Amon would show when he heard this? But the Assyrian Empire's upper echelons in the city of Lys couldn't laugh. Only they knew how badly Sinek was injured. Rather than saying that he was still alive, it was better to say that he was a walking corpse that could barely breathe. According to the news from the palace, although Emperor Sinek couldn't move or speak, he hadn't completely lost consciousness. Only the sage of the empire could communicate with His Majesty through the soul. Currently, Sinek was being guarded day and night by the sage of the empire's priests, who took turns to cast magic to keep him alive. The empire's upper echelons were currently concerned about one thing: who would inherit Emperor Seneca's throne? No matter what kind of will he made. It seemed that only Faust could pass it on. Some people also suspected that Emperor Sinek wasn't fully conscious, but Faust's words would become the emperor's orders. Even his will could be fabricated. But no one dared to openly question it, because the regent Empress Samir trusted the sage of the empire very much. Sinek was assassinated in the city of Tunis, far away from the Assyrian Empire. The incident happened so suddenly that the Assyrian Empire was left without a leader. At this time, the sage of the empire, Faust, passed on the emperor's order to let Empress Samir become the regent. If there were no accidents, Samir would be the one to control the empire in the future. No matter who wanted to control the Assyrian Empire, they had to deal with three forces. First, they had to deal with the priests, who represented the divine right. Most importantly, they had to get the support of Faust, who supported Samir with all his might. Secondly, they had to deal with the military. They couldn't afford to let anything happen to the military at this time. Samir immediately transferred a large number of the empire's soldiers to Lisbon, in the name of preventing a counterattack from the Kingdom of Babylon. The third force was the nobles and bureaucrats. No matter who they supported, their first choice was to protect their own interests. Most of the opportunists were also looking at the attitudes of the clergy and the military. As long as Sinek was still alive, Samir's regency wouldn't be an obstacle. But everyone was concerned about the same thing. Would Sinek die? When would he die? Late at night, two people were having a secret discussion in the palace. They were Faust and Samir. Samir sat in the middle of the hall, where Sinek used to sit. Faust obviously had a seat, but he stood there and bowed as he spoke. Samuel asked, "How long can you maintain His Majesty's life?" Faust replied, "If the clergy take turns taking care of him, there shouldn't be a problem for half a year. I can even keep him alive." After thinking for a while, he carefully added, "It's impossible for His Majesty to wake up. He can die at any time. It's up to you to decide when he'll leave this world." Samir's expression was a little sad. His life doesn't belong to him anymore. It only has symbolic meaning to others. He needs to stay alive until the situation stabilizes. His life's pursuit was to make the world tremble under his hooves. He did it, but he didn't expect it to end like this, did he? The all-powerful Emperor Sinek of Assur, at the peak of his fame and achievements, ended up in a situation where he could neither live nor die. If he was still conscious, what would he think? Faust looked at Empress Samir and cautiously reminded her, "Whether the situation in the empire can be stabilized or not depends on what we do. Everyone is trying to figure out your attitude, and what kind of national policy you will adopt after you take power. Have you considered it?" Samir's eyes seemed to be looking into the distant void. He did not answer the question. The reason why we stopped Sinek's atrocities was because we did not want to see the disaster that his brutality would bring. Other than pity for the innocent, There was also a deeper fear in his words. Do you know what this fear is, sage imperial tutor? Faust could vaguely feel a stabbing pain in his soul. It was the imprint left by Shandan that had been inadvertently touched, causing him to feel an indescribable burning desire. However, he lowered his head and replied, I'd like to hear the details. Samir continued, We are afraid of ourselves. We are afraid that we will have to wield our weapons forever, until we collapse from exhaustion. We are also afraid that we will suffer the same fate in the future. We will accept the same fate as those who were brutally slaughtered. Wherever the Asur's iron hooves passed, the more pain there was, the more hatred there was. In the history of the continent, there has never been an empire that could remain invincible forever. When Asur was weak, although it suffered a lot, it was not brutally slaughtered. When it was strong, it was surrounded by corpses. If the cycle of history brought Asur back to its former glory, would it still be able to exist? I saw fear in the depths of Seneca's heart. He might not have noticed it before, but it must be very strong now. This fear is also rooted in the soul of all Asur's conquerors, although they are unwilling to touch it. They are afraid that one day, they will be trampled and slaughtered like the people they once conquered. Faust couldn't help but shiver, but the scorching feeling in his soul became even more intense. Sudan's words echoed in his mind again. A person's belief has always been the master of his heart. I'm just asking you to examine your heart. Please release your desire, and tell yourself how to fulfill it. So he coughed and said, Your Majesty, I want to tell you a story. There was a world where there were two families. One was prosperous and rich, while the other was weak and poor. They were very far apart, but one day, they finally met. The poor envied the prosperous. Then one day, the prosperous family fell ill. The other family rushed into their house, robbed them of their wealth, and slaughtered their wives and children. From then on, there was a deep fear in the world. The slaughterer feared that the other family would recover from their illness, and feared that he would become strong again. If that happened, it would mean that his sins would be settled, his wealth would be plundered, and his family would be slaughtered. That was what he had done. He dared not repent, nor could he disobey. He would not and could not truly confess his sins. He could not return the wealth he stole, and he could not atone for his sins with his actions. He could only consolidate his power and try to weaken the other forever, taking everything he had. Every time the other party recovered from his illness, he would think of another massacre and robbery. The idea is simple. Because you are weak, you have to bear it. Because you are recovering, you are a threat to me. Chapter 252. Faust sighed. It's a pity that the world is like this. Perhaps on the day of the apocalypse, the gods will judge the world. Samir's expression changed slightly. That's Seneca's world, and Seneca has ushered in his doom. Are you trying to say that everyone in the world has a cynic in their heart? Don't forget that we're discussing the national policy of Assyria, not the end of the world. Faust bowed apologetically. Your Majesty, forgive me for straying from the topic. Let's go back to the discussion just now. We should first maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire. It must not collapse. The Assyrian Empire may seem strong at the moment, but if it collapses, the fate of the Assyrian conquerors will fall upon their heads. The first thing we need to do is to consolidate our rule in the occupied territories. At present, we can no longer expand. Even if there comes a day when we can't hold these territories anymore and have to retreat, we can't return them to Babylon. We can encourage the people to divide and conquer, provoking civil strife and plunging them into eternal chaos. Samir frowned slightly. You're guessing the future, but I'm asking about the present. Faust whispered, but I'm worried about the future. Do you think that in the near future, the Assyrian army will still be able to maintain the fighting strength, and will they had when Seneca was alive? Samir sighed and replied, Of course not. Seneca had been preparing for more than a decade, and the people of the Assyrian Empire had tightened their belts and trained such a powerful army. What was the purpose? It was to conquer. But what was the purpose of conquering? The Assyrian warriors had become the new nobles, plundering a lot of wealth, owning large tracts of land and hordes of slaves. Their extravagance was spreading day by day. Even if they were brave warriors now, What would happen in a few years? What would happen to their next generation? Apart from cruelty, what would they have left for this world? After a sigh, Samir continued, whether it's the end of the world or the tomorrow of the Assyrian Empire, what you're talking about today is today's national policy. Faust muttered, we need to digest and assimilate the occupied cities as soon as possible, and the focus is on consolidating the benefits we've gained so that all forces can benefit. I once formulated a national policy for Emperor Shinnok, but he did not completely adopt it. Now there is no need to update it. If Prime Minister Alpha also supports this, then there is only one thing left. Samuel asked calmly, what's the matter? Let His Majesty Shinnok choose the most suitable time to die, and you will become the Queen of Assyria. If you want to save the fate of the empire, you must take control of it yourself. I'm just a warrior and a woman at that. How can I become the great emperor of Assyria? Samir looked a little doubtful. Faust raised his head and looked at Samuel with a passionate gaze. I will support you with all my strength. In my heart, you will always be my queen. Faust looked up at Samuel and said. Samir avoided his gaze and waved his hand. Lord Imperial Tutor, I understand what you mean. It's getting late and you should be tired. Please go back and rest. Faust wanted to say something, but he had no choice but to leave. When he reached the door, Samir suddenly called out to him, wait. Faust quickly turned around and looked at Samuel. My queen, what else can I do for you? Samuel looked at him with a questioning gaze and slowly asked, you are the most knowledgeable person in the empire. As far as you know, is there any way to cure Shinnok? Tell me the truth, don't hide anything. Faust sighed slightly and replied, Your Majesty, as far as I know, there is indeed a magic that can cure Shinnok's injury. It is the blessing of Isis performed by the adoratress of the Temple of Isis of Igut. Other than that, no other magic in the world can cure him. Samuel was stunned for a moment, then said, That's as good as not saying anything. Faust continued, This may really be the will of the gods. Regarding this matter, did the gods send down an oracle? Samuel asked meaningfully, Which god are you referring to, Lord Imperial Tutor? Faust bowed his head and replied, Enril. Samuel said noncommittally, The announcement I made was in accordance with the instructions of Enril's oracle. At least on the surface, none of us have violated Enril's oracle, right? Faust said, According to Enril's oracle, the announcement only mentioned one Ammonius, and let him bear all the responsibility. This is clearly to let the Assyrian Empire continue to fight against Talingcheng. If you ascend to the throne, but do not launch an expedition to retaliate against Talingcheng, I'm afraid some people in the empire will not be satisfied. Samuel asked again, Lord Imperial Tutor, what do you think of this matter? Faust took a step forward from the doorway and replied, This is a dilemma. You are now in power, and the best choice is to transfer the main force of the imperial army to Lisbon to monitor it. If you send the army back to the Assyrian Empire, and then cross the plateau, I'm afraid it will be out of control. But if you do not avenge Emperor Shinnok, you will not be able to quell the voices of doubt and opposition, and you will not be able to gain the support of all sides. There is a risk of internal division in the empire. Samuel waved his hand again and said, I know what to do. You can go and rest. Faust thought that Samir would have more to say, or something else when he stopped him. He did not expect that Samir would still ask him to leave after asking two simple questions. He did not have the chance to say what he wanted to say the most in his heart. He had given Samuel enough hints, expressed his feelings for her, and tried to let Samuel understand what he meant to her now, but Samuel did not respond. When Faust walked out of the inner hall, he could not help but think to himself, Do I need to make things clearer? But if I do that, it will not be an expression of love, but a threat. Faust was conflicted. Close to the Babylon River, there was a towering tower that reached into the clouds. It was called the Tower of Babel by the people of Babylon, and it was officially called the Gate of God in the kingdom. The tower had a history of hundreds of years. It had been carefully built by the successive kings of Babylon, and it was a wonder on the continent. The tower was a huge multi-storied platform, with a total of 9 floors. Each floor was more than 30 feet high, and there was a spiral staircase that led to the top of the tower. At the entrance of the tower was Marduk's shrine, and on the 9th floor of the tower was either the shrine with the statue of the god, or the palace of the god Marduk in the human world. No one would erect a statue of himself in his home for worship, because he himself was the god. According to legend, the top of the tower was the gate to the divine kingdom. The successive king of Babylon had built a residence for the god Marduk in the human world. According to the ideals of secular life, people served the god like an emperor, and selected young and beautiful women of the kingdom to live here to accompany Marduk. Only the king and the high priest of the kingdom had the right to enter the top of the tower at will, symbolizing that they could listen to the teachings of the god face to face. But even they could not enter the bedroom of the great god Marduk. The lower 8 floors of the tower also required the permission of the main shrine of the kingdom to enter, and usually only the high priests had the right to enter the tower. But today, there was a very special guest. Accompanied by Prince Vonnet, he passed through Marduk's shrine to the bottom of the tower, and asked the guards to retreat to the side. When the prince walked over, he deliberately took 2 steps back to follow the man. If this man wanted to reach the top of the tower, even if it was Prince Vonnet's will, it would still be against the kingdom's laws. Perhaps the priests guarding the lower 8 floors would not be willing to let him go. But Prince Vonnet did not order the priests to let him go. He just asked the guards to retreat and respectfully walked the man to the foot of the tower. The man stepped into the void, and the next moment he appeared at the top of the tower. This towering tower was reached in 1 step by Ammon. It was hard to imagine that the craftsman of the mortal world could create such a miracle. This tower was built by chiseling an entire stone mountain into a conical shape, and the top was flattened. Ascending to the top of the tower, there was a magnificent palace. Outside the palace were guards guarding the door, and inside the palace were palace maids. Ammon did not enter the door, nor did he greet anyone. He took 1 step to the top of the tower, and then disappeared with a 2nd step. Wendy and Hyruya walked into Marduk's bedroom in a thin embroidered dress, her curvaceous body faintly discernible. It was now the afternoon nap time for Marduk, and she was going to serve the god for his afternoon nap. Although she had been here for 3 years, she had never seen the legendary great god, but she could not slack off in all the daily rituals. She walked into the luxurious bedroom, first knelt to the big bed, knelt on the ground, and untied the embroidered dress, leaving only the tassels on her chest and lower abdomen, then got up and lay on the left side of the big bed. Every afternoon, she had to do the same thing. She washed her body with warm water mixed with spices, and served the non-existent god to sleep. For the subjects of the kingdom of Babylon, this may be a legendary sacred ritual, but Wendy's heart was already numb, and it was just a mechanical action repeated every day. When she lay down, she did not feel tired at all. Every day, besides eating, praying, bathing, changing clothes, and sleeping, she had nothing else to do, and could not leave the top of the tower. She was chosen from the people, a woman who served the god Marduk, and lived in the gate of God that led to the divine kingdom, and could not leave the Tower of Babel. The feelings she had when she first climbed the tower 3 years ago had now faded, as if it was a matter of hundreds of years ago. Now that she thought about it, there was no happiness or excitement, but more unease and fear. But 3 years had passed, and she felt like a shell, beautiful and sexy but soulless. Now that the fear had disappeared, she did not even care if she was dead or alive. Lying on the soft bed, she muttered to herself, "Marduk, everyone calls you the great god, but where are you? I have never seen you. The so-called saintess of Babylon who came here before me, they did not even see you until they died. It is said in the world that the saintess of Babylon will forever maintain her youth and beauty. Yes, every day I receive the blessing of the priests to protect my delicate face. But what people do not know is that almost all the saintesses of Babylon will die before their youth is over, because there is nothing left for them to live for. People call me the saintess of Babylon, but they do not know that I am actually a prisoner of Babylon, a prisoner forever imprisoned in this palace, unable to walk out of the palace gate at the top of the tower. Marduk, if you are a god, you should be able to hear my voice. Please release your prisoner. If you are unwilling, you can even end my meaningless life. Are you the legendary saintess of Babylon? Very beautiful indeed." A man's voice suddenly rang out from the bedroom. Wendy cried out in surprise and jumped up from the bed, the tips of her nipples drawing an elastic curve under the tassels on her chest. She stared at the person who had suddenly appeared, dumbfounded. He was a young man with sharp facial features. His mouth had a resolute expression, but his gaze was gentle. He was well-built, and his face was handsome. He wore a light white linen robe, and his body was untainted by even a speck of dust. The door to the bedroom had always been closed, but he had appeared out of thin air in front of the bed. No man could enter this bedroom, not even the king or the high priest of the kingdom. The people who took care of Wendy's daily life were all palace maids of the Divine Gate. The palace maids were rotated every year, unlike Wendy who had to stay here forever. She envied those palace maids. As the Saintess of Babylon of the Divine Gate, she was a woman who served the gods. Of course, she should not be disrespectful to the gods. But Wendy did not care anymore. All this was just a meaningless waste of her life. Today, she finally said the words in her heart. And then she heard a man's voice and saw him appear in front of the bed. Wendy's shock was indescribable, and when she reacted, she hurriedly jumped out of bed, prostrated herself on the ground and kissed the carpet in front of Amon's feet, saying in a trembling voice, "Great God Marduk, you have finally appeared. Please forgive me for my disrespect, but that is indeed my heart. If you want to punish me or even end my life, Wendy will not complain." The person who came was not Marduk, but Amon who had come to visit the Divine Gate. Amon looked at her, and for some reason, the expression in his eyes was very complicated, containing gentle regret and even painful memories. He waved his hand, and an invisible force lifted Wendy up out of thin air. He said as gently as possible, "You have not answered my question yet. Are you the Saintess of Babylon?" Wendy trembled and replied, "Yes, my name is Wendy, the woman who serves you here. The Saintess of Babylon used to be someone else, but now it is me." What touched Amon's heart was the title of Saintess, but the so-called Saintess of Babylon in front of him was completely different from the Saintess of Isis, of the Empire of Igut. The Saintess of Isis was the chief high priest of the Lower Empire, and Wendy was just a poor prisoner in the Tower of Babylon. But when he heard the title of Saintess, Amon could not help but think of Maria. He had also heard Wendy's voice just now, and he knew what kind of torment this beautiful girl was suffering in her heart to say such disrespectful words to the gods. He also thought of Maria, who also lived in the invisible cage of fate, and he could not even touch her. This god had an inexplicable wish in his heart, and he wanted to save this poor girl and fulfill her wish, just to remember the eternal Maria in his heart. Thinking of this, Amon did not reveal anything about his identity. Wendy had mistaken him for someone else, and he was not Marduk, but there was one thing that was right, he was indeed a god. Amon sat down on the spacious and comfortable chair in the bedroom, and said in a mysterious and serene tone, "Wendy, the gods have heard your voice, and have appeared before you. Please tell me, is what you said just now your wish? Have you ever thought about what you will face when you leave this Tower of Babylon?" Wendy raised her beautiful face and replied timidly, "Please forgive me, I still can't believe that the gods have really appeared before me, and I don't know what to say. You look completely different from what I imagined." Amon smiled, and secretly cast magic to calm Wendy's overwhelmed emotions. He sat there and replied, "You don't have to worry about what I look like. Different gods may appear in different appearances. In the presence of the gods, you only need to say your prayers." Wendy gradually calmed down, and as if she had gathered her courage, she bowed her head and replied, "You have heard my prayers. As for what it is like under the Tower of Babylon, I am not ignorant, because I grew up there and came from there. If you think that my thoughts are a betrayal of the gods, I would rather accept the punishment, because I really do think that way." Amon asked again, "Where are you from in the kingdom of Babylon?" Wendy replied, "I grew up in the city of Lys." Amon's heart sank slightly and he had to say, "Don't you know that the city of Lys, your hometown, is no longer there? The Assyrian Empire captured the city and carried out a brutal massacre." Wendy finally could not help but shake her shoulders and began to sob. "Of course I know. I heard it clearly when the high priest climbed to the top of the tower and prayed to the gods. I thought that my soul had become numb after coming to the gate of God. Only then did I know that I could still shed tears. I prayed to the gods over and over again, but it did not save my hometown. It was then that the thoughts I had just now sprouted in my heart. God, if you cannot save the city of Lys, why did you imprison me here? Amon sighed. His sigh was desolate and helpless. He shook his head. I did not destroy the city of Lys, it was the army of the mortal empire. And I did not imprison you here, it was the priests of the kingdom of Babylon. I can help you fulfill your wish, but tell me, beautiful girl, what can you do after leaving this place? Wendy replied. My father was a gardener, and the best gardener in the city of Lys. I can cultivate all kinds of flowers and trees, and know how to prune them to make them grow stronger. I can also process fresh flowers into all kinds of fragrant ornaments. I can also cultivate the seeds of all kinds of plants. I can embroider. I can help you fulfill your wish. I can also cut clothes and... Chapter 253. Wendy blinked her long eyelashes, stood up straight and said, Please ask, I will answer truthfully. Amon's aura was imperceptibly filled with the solemnity of the gods, but he still said with a smile, When you climb this tower, you realize that the gate of the gods is not what you think it is just a cage of life. But before you came here, besides awe, you must have longed for it. If this is really the gate to the divine kingdom, what is your wish? Wendy's bright eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of light. She narrowed her eyes and said, Of course I hope that the gods can take me to the divine kingdom, to enjoy the legendary happiness of leaving the mortal world. God, please tell me, can mortals enter the divine kingdom in heaven, even after death? Such a simple question, but Amon as a god, was stunned. Ever since he left Duk in his youth, he had been trying to solve the riddle left to him by Crazy Ol. Can a person become a god? How can one become a god? Now he already had an answer, because he himself had become a deity and had proven this path. But this answer could not solve Wendy's problem. It could be seen that this pure and beautiful girl was not suitable to practice body arts, nor was she a mage. It was already extremely difficult for people to break through to the higher realms, let alone become a god. Even as a god, Amon had never been to any divine kingdom, and it was even more impossible for mortals to leave this world and reach the eternity where neither life nor death existed. But Wendy's words made Amon think about another question, related to his vow, and also related to his experience in the underworld. Is it possible to create a world and become the home of the soul? That short moment is like an eternity, that is the heaven of the dream, or the hell in the heart. The people there are not gods, but souls after death cannot freely enter the eternal world. They can enter the eternal world in the moment after death, and perhaps they can leave again. Thinking of so many things, Amon said to Wendy kindly, I am also thinking about your question, and I hope to answer it in the future. As for now, I'm here to meet another god. Could you please go out and close the door? When I leave, I will help you leave the gate of God and go to the human world where you want to go. Wendy walked out of Marduk's bedroom and closed the door, and the maids on duty in the outer hall were all startled and hurried forward to greet her. Lady Adoratress, what happened? How can you come out? Although Wendy had been attending to Marduk's afternoon nap every day for the past 3 years, she had never seen the deity appear in person. But she made sure to stay in bed for as long as necessary, according to the prescribed rituals. She came out before the time limit was up. This was something that had never happened in the Gate of God. The palace maids were all shocked. Wendy suppressed her excitement and said as calmly as she could, The god wants to meet another god here, and doesn't want anyone to disturb them. The palace maids covered their chests in unison, all petrified, and after a moment, they knelt down in unison towards the door of the inner hall. Someone shouted, Lady Adoratress, according to the ancient ritual, when the god descends, the bell on the top of the tower must be rung. Wendy was startled, a little hesitant, but then she showed a very dignified expression. This was the first time in 3 years that she had spoken in the tone of the Adoratress of Baron. The god said not to disturb, even if it is a ritual prescribed by the kingdom. The bell on the Tower of Babel did not ring in the end, but a palace maid rushed to the outside of the palace, and went down the tower to report the news of the god's arrival to the priests. Amon watched Wendy walk around the screen and out of the bedroom and close the door. Suddenly, He sensed something and turned his head to see Marduk sitting in another chair looking at him with a faint smile. Seeing Amon turn his head, Marduk said in a joking tone, "You think I don't know that you like to kidnap people to my place?" Amon sighed. That girl is known as the adoratress of Baron, but she is not really treated as a person, just a gift that will never be accepted. Why do you bother doing this? Marduk shook his head. This is not done by me, but by the kings and priests of Babylon. Amon also shook his head. But all this happened under your nose. For hundreds of years. Why do you bother to imprison so many beautiful youths here? Marduk curled the corner of his mouth slightly. This is the sacrifice of the world to express their faith, and as the king of the kingdom, I should allow them to choose their own way. If you like that girl, feel free to take her away. Except for Murin, who may be a little unhappy, no other god will care about this matter. Amon added, since you did not stop the kingdom of Babylon from using this method of sacrifice, and they are here to serve you at least. Marduk suddenly laughed, interrupting Amon with a chuckle. Ammonius, are you a man? Amon was taken aback. Of course I am. Marduk. What you just said is that your thinking is still limited by the times of the world, but I am a person who has long since transcended, or rather, I have already surpassed the times of the tower. I believe that men and women are equal. What about you? Amon frowned. I think so too, but what do you mean by that? Marduk put his hands on the back of the chair and crossed his legs, shaking his toes as he said unhurriedly, if there is a beautiful woman, all the men in the world want to have sex with such a woman. So the people elect a man and let him sleep with the woman. Do you think it is necessary for the woman to agree? Amon said coldly. Of course not. It is ridiculous. Marduk slapped the back of the chair and said, isn't that right? I am such a handsome, strong and charismatic man. Do you think they can take advantage of me just because they choose a woman who has nothing to do with me? Of course I don't even want to see her. If you believe that men and women are equal, you should naturally think so. Even Amon, who had never been one to laugh, couldn't help but be amused by Marduk at this moment. After laughing, he asked, what will you do after I take Wendy away? Marduk stopped smiling and said lightly, I won't do anything. The kingdom of Babylon will choose another adoratress and send her here to complete their ceremony. Amon was just about to continue when Marduk suddenly waved his hand. He heard the prayers of countless people and saw their images. Those who struggled on the edge of suffering, slavery, and life and death prayed to Marduk. What many people looked forward to was Wendy's life in the Gate of God, a luxurious palace, hordes of servants, the best food and clothes in the world automatically delivered to her, never having to worry or work. Marduk curled his lips again and said, you said that the Gate of God is the cage of Wendy's fate, but the world under this tower is a cage for countless people. Wendy wants to leave, but too many people think of the cage she is in. Then they think of another way. As a god, you can't save everyone. If you have ears, you'd better think about the bigger cage. You didn't come to the Gate of God for Wendy. Let's get down to business. How are you going to kill Enril? Do you already have a plan? Amon replied. If I didn't have a plan, I wouldn't have come to the Gate of God to see you. Enril will definitely be waiting for me to show up, and where do you think he will send people to monitor my movements at any time? Marduk looked at Amon and did not answer the question. You were injured by the combined forces of the god of flame and the god of ash, and your strength has been figured out by Enril. Looking at you, it seems that your magic hasn't recovered yet? Amon nodded. Yes, I need to find the most suitable place in the world for training, and one that is absolutely safe. Marduk asked again. You have not received guidance from any divine clan, so naturally you will not go to the divine realm, but you should have a divine palace in the world, right? Amon nodded again and said, yes, I have a divine palace called the Garden of Eden, but it is not fully built yet. Marduk's smile was a little mysterious. Then the best place for you to recuperate is the palace of Murin. Amon also smiled. So I know where Enril will be waiting for me, and as soon as I appear, he will naturally be able to find my whereabouts. Marduk added. Once he makes a move, he will not give others a chance to save you. Your current state is a little worrying, and I'm afraid you won't be able to do it until you have fully recovered your strength. Aman pointed around and said, "That's why I came to the gate of God, not just to see you. I have to say that this tower is very well built, and this is the most suitable place on earth for gods to recuperate. It is also the most suitable place for me to cultivate and recover my strength, and it is very safe." Marduk laughed again. "Ah, Aman, you really know how to take advantage of me, abducting the Virgin of Baron, and even borrowing the palace." Aman said with a straight face, "You can refuse." Marduk's figure slowly disappeared, his laughter still echoing in the bedroom. "How could I refuse? Compared to the risk you took to lure Enril to attack, my sacrifice seems to be too little. You can try to recover your strength here. And in order to thank you for your success in assassinating Cynic, I can give you a choice, either take Wendy away, or make another request of me." Aman replied indifferently, "There is no need to make another request. I have promised Wendy that I will take her away." Something big had happened. Something big. A god has descended into the palace on earth, and is living there. For the first time, the palace built by the king of Babylon to serve Marduk has its original purpose. Except for Wendy, the Virgin of Baron, no one has seen a god, but some people have heard the voice of the god in their souls. The god wants to live in the gate of God for a period of time. He didn't want to be disturbed, and he didn't want the news to leak. Because the god had sent down an oracle, the ordinary people naturally did not know the news, but they were curious about why the temple of Marduk under the Tower of Babel had been holding all kinds of sacrificial ceremonies for days, and the high officials and priests of the kingdom had ascended the Tower of Babel. The powerful lords climbed the tower, but could not enter the palace, and could only worship and pray outside the palace. All the daily life of the god in the inner palace was taken care of by Wendy, the Virgin of Baron, and the palace maids could only serve in the outer palace. Every word that Wendy conveyed was treated as an oracle. Everyone thought that Marduk had descended, and only a few people in the kingdom knew that it was Ammonius. Aman was sent by Prince Binut, but His Royal Highness did not expect that this god would occupy the palace and the Virgin of Baron, and live in the Tower of Babel so openly. Marduk did not seem to have sent down an oracle to express his opposition, so Prince Binut had to keep quiet. Aman lived in the gate of God for several months, meditating in peace without anyone disturbing him. Wendy took care of his daily life. In fact, Aman did not need her to take care of anything, but at least it was much more convenient to have someone around. Aman also told Wendy the truth that he was not Marduk but Ammonius. When Wendy learned the truth, she was stunned for a long time, then suddenly fell in front of Aman's feet, hugged his legs and burst into tears. The high priest of the kingdom had held a prayer ceremony in the front hall of the Gate of God not long ago, and this ceremony was traditionally presided over by Wendy, the Virgin of Baron. Wendy had also heard the latest news. Ammonius had sent down a punishment, and the Assyrian Emperor Cynic was dying and would soon die. The prayer of the high priest of Baron was different from the announcement issued by the Assyrian Empire. Of course, it was said in the words that the god liked to hear, and it was closer to the truth. The Assyrian Emperor Cynic destroyed Wendy's hometown, Lisbon, and Ammonius' punishment of Cynic was tantamount to avenging Wendy. The god in front of me is the most grateful Ammonius. How could Wendy not be excited? Aman helped Wendy up and asked, "Why are you crying so sadly when you heard that I am not Marduk?" At this moment, Wendy had forgotten her fear of the gods, and did not even think about whether she was being rude, so she simply hugged Aman and sobbed in his chest. "It's you, you assassinated the tyrant Cynic. I will be forever grateful to you in this life. No matter what I do, I will never be able to repay you." Although she was crying loudly, Wendy was more overjoyed. If she had known that a god would come to the gate of God, she would have preferred to be Meng instead of Marduk. Since Aman lived here, Wendy had completely come to life, as if her soul had awakened, and she was no longer a beautiful shell. She still stayed at the top of the tower and could not go out, but the feeling was completely different, full of the youthful aura of a young girl. Although Aman did not deliberately say anything, Wendy did not point out to anyone that the god in the inner hall was not Marduk but Aman. Anyway, everyone thought it was Marduk, so let it be so. Even Marduk himself did not show up to object, so what else was there for others to say? Prince Binut had always been aware of this matter. And the king of Babylon, Hammurabi II, also learned the inside story from Prince Binut. One day, 3 months later, Wendy walked into the inner hall and told Amon that Prince Binut and the high priest of the kingdom were outside the palace asking the gods for permission, hoping that he could see the king. The king should have come in person, but he was seriously ill and bedridden, so he specially presented the most precious gift of the kingdom, asking the gods to bless him in person. During this period of time, Amon lived in the gate of God as a god, and in addition to concentrating on recovering his strength, he also gained other things. He received all kinds of valuable gifts from the nobles of the kingdom of Babylon, which added up to a staggering amount of wealth. He could not refuse these gifts. If Wendy went out to pass on his message and refused, those people would be so scared that they would break out in a cold sweat, and even want to jump off the tower. These gifts, in addition to many luxurious utensils and treasures, were a large number of special parangons. Although the kingdom of Babylon was greatly weakened after the defeat, the wealth of the nobles in the kingdom was not affected much. Many of them were quite generous with their gifts, and naturally, they would choose the most precious gifts to give to the gods. Amon happened to be in need of money. He did not have much use for the money himself, but this wealth was extremely important to the current city of Talung. In recent years, the construction and conquest of Murin's treasure had long been used up. Although Talung also produced resources, the current output was far less than the consumption of war and construction. The city's finances were already on the verge of being exhausted. It was just the right time to take this money back to Aesop, which could solve the urgent problems of Talung. Amon really made a lot of money from Marduk. Since he had received such a large amount of wealth from the kingdom of Babylon, and the gift from the king was the most precious of all, Amon did not want to give face to the king. And according to Wendy's message, Prince Binut knew that he was Ammonius and not Marduk, but he was still eager to see this god. Amon asked Wendy to tell Binut outside the hall to stop a carriage at the foot of the tower, and not to disturb anyone else. He would appear directly in the carriage. That evening, Prince Binut's carriage surrounded by his guards left the Tower of Babel, followed by the carriage and guards of the high priest of the kingdom. The unrelated people bowed and saluted, and Amon's carriage drove directly into the palace. Even when entering the palace gate, he did not stop to dismount. This was a courtesy that only a distinguished guest could receive. In the carriage, Amon asked Binut, "Your uncle knows that I am not Marduk, and not the god his kingdom believes in. So why is he so eager to see me?" Binut sighed and said, "A king wants to see a god when he is seriously ill. Do you think there is anything else?" This sentence revealed the mentality of many ancient emperors in their later years. They already had all the glory and splendor in the world, and could use power and wealth to fulfill all kinds of wishes. However, there was one desire that could never be satisfied, and that was when the end of their lives came. They would die like those lowly peasants. At this time, they would often pray to the gods for the prescription of immortality, and the seriously ill kings would hope that the gods could use their divine power to help them come back from the dead. If all these could not be achieved, their prayers would not change, but in a different form, praying that they could still enjoy everything in life after death, and continue to be kings in another world. Chapter 254. In the palace of Babylon, Amon saw Hammurabi II lying on his sickbed. This old king was nearly 80 years old. He used to be very stout, but now he was very thin. The skin on his cheeks and chin were wrinkled and drooped. His eyes were sunken in, and his cheekbones and forehead had an abnormal red luster. Seeing this luster, Amon knew that this person was already sick. If he was an ordinary person, he would have died a long time ago. He had been relying on the various blessings performed by the priests to keep him alive. But no matter how magical the power of the magic was, it could only adjust a person's bodily functions to the best state. When these functions were exhausted, even the most brilliant blessings masters could not do anything. Hammurabi II was in a half-asleep, half-unconscious state. He lay there with his mouth half open, gasping for breath. It seemed that he was struggling to wait for something. When Amon walked in, he suddenly opened his eyes. A strong luster of desire appeared in his turbid eyes. His shoulders and elbows moved, as if he wanted to get up from the bed. The priests guarding the sickbed exclaimed in a low voice, His Majesty is awake. Aman said softly, Your Majesty, you don't have to sit up. As he spoke, he flicked his finger, and the abnormal blush on Hammurabi II's face disappeared. His face returned to its previous deathly pale color. However, his mind was completely clear, and he could speak clearly. Lying on the sickbed, Hammurabi II said in an old voice, God, please forgive me for my rudeness. The pain is tormenting me like a poisonous snake biting my body. I can already feel that the poison has spread to every corner of my body. I can't get up and kneel before your feet. Thank you for coming here in person. I pray for your blessing. All things wither and flourish. The trees that lose their yellow leaves in autumn seem to die in winter. But when the earth returns to spring, they will be rejuvenated. It is said that this is the power of God to awaken all things. Dear God, please bestow this power on me. I will be your servant forever. Aman had guessed correctly. The moment Hammurabi II opened his mouth, he prayed to the gods to bring him back to life and restore his vitality. When Aman walked in, everyone in the room, except the king, knelt down before him, including Prince Binut and the chief high priest of the kingdom. The high priest was a little hesitant, but seeing that Prince Binut was also kneeling, he had no choice but to follow suit. Aman did not say anything. He reached out and pointed at King, who was lying on the sickbed. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Hammurabi II's body. The king's face regained its normal color. Miraculously, he found that he had regained his vigor in an instant, as if he had returned to the time when he was young and strong. He was so surprised that he jumped up from the bed and knelt in front of Aman, shouting in a trembling voice, Thank you, Almighty God. You have given me a new life. When the others in the room saw this scene, they were shocked beyond words. Since ancient times, no one had ever heard of a god being able to bring an emperor back to life, but with a wave of God Aman's hand, he had truly brought the dying Hammurabi II back to life and back to life. Prince Binut's expression was very complicated. He was shocked, but it was hard to tell if he was confused or regretful. But Aman shook his head and said, Trees wither and flourish, but there will be a day when they truly wither. The new leaf that sprouts every spring is not the same leaf that fell last year. A person's life will eventually come to an end. Perhaps the soul will be reborn in another way, but that will no longer be you. Your Majesty King, I did not give you a new life. You feel full of strength now. That is my gratitude, and I am using my divine power to support you. During the trial of fate, the god's tear passed down by the adoratress of the Temple of Isis had strangely merged with Aman's body and mind. Although he did not know the blessing of Isis, that only the adoratress could perform, he could perform another kind of magic, the protection of Isis, better than any other mage in the world. Aman used his own divine power to support Hammurabi II, allowing him to regain the vigor he had when he was young and strong. At the same time, he stimulated the last bit of potential in his life. His soul became sober and comfortable. But Aman could not stand here forever, shrouding Hammurabi II in his own golden light. As soon as he left, the king would fall again. A look of deep disappointment flashed across Hammurabi II's eyes, but it was immediately replaced by a stronger expectation. He knelt on the ground and raised his head, saying, God, since you have such divine power, can I ask you to protect me like this, so that I can continue to be young and full of vigor? Aman asked with no expression. Your Majesty King, you asked me for a blessing and said that you wish to be my servant forever. I blessed you and allowed you to get up from your sickbed before your death, but you made such a request to me. If I put my light on you forever, wouldn't I become your servant forever? Even the empires on the continent cannot stay strong forever, let alone the life of a king. The king's request was too much, and the god was obviously unhappy. Hammurabi II lowered his head and said, God, please forgive me. Can I ask you another thing? In the world after death, can souls enjoy eternal peace and happiness? Zaman replied, Why don't you just tell me your wish to be a king in the other world? But I want to ask you another question. If the kingdom in the other world really exists, and you met your grandfather, Hammurabi I, and the previous kings of Babylon, who would be able to enjoy the glory of that king? Would it be you? So the world you wish for doesn't exist. I can answer your question. Your departed soul will be received by the underworld of Anunnaki, so that the underworld king can hear your prayers and pleas. And from your spiritual imprint in this life, she will draw what she wants, and you will stay in the momentary darkness for what seems like an eternity. Your soul may have a new life, but it is meaningless to you. You are the only one who is meaningful to it. Understood? Hammurabi too did not understand. He raised his head and asked, "A new life? What I want is a new life. May I ask who the new life will be?" Ammon let out a helpless sigh. The so-called new life is not you. When the autumn leaves rot in the dust will become fertile and nourish the trees to sprout in the spring. That is another living being, and you can understand it this way. If you really want to know who that person is, even the gods can't decide. Perhaps it is just such a living being. If this bird was once a king, does it mean anything to you? Ammon pointed to a parrot in a birdcage hanging by the palace gate, and asked the king in front of him meaningfully. The king looked at the birdcage and was stunned. His lips moved slightly, but no one knew what he wanted to say. Ammon turned and walked out of the palace gate as he said slowly, "It may be logical for you to have this kingdom, but you take it for granted. But have you ever thought about why you should enjoy all this forever? Go to the other people in the world. Maybe you can be them, and they can be you. Wear the golden light I bestow upon you and spend the last night of your life filled with youthful vigor. This is my gift to you." After saying this, Ammon's figure disappeared in front of the palace gate. Hammurabi too was still kneeling there in the golden light. The next morning, the king of Babylon, Hammurabi too, passed away. The whole country mourned, and then it was followed by a celebration. They mourned the passing of the king, and celebrated the succession of the new king Benut-I. On the same day that Hammurabi too passed away, another monarch fell on the continent. The new capital of the Assur Empire, Lisbon, announced that the invincible King Sinek of Assur had seriously injured Ammonius in battle, but he was ambushed by the evil god. Unfortunately, he was seriously injured and passed away. Sinek could have continued to live, but he could also die at any time. It all depended on when Samir decided to stop the magic circle protecting him. And the day had finally come. The sage imperial tutor, Lord Faust, read out Senecas' will in public as the chief high priest of the empire. He passed the throne to his most beloved queen, Samir, who had made countless meritorious deeds on the battlefield with him. As for whether Sinek, who was unconscious and unable to speak or move, could leave behind such a will, no one could say for sure. However, Lord Faust's words were the decree of the emperor. Was Samir really his most beloved queen? Not long ago, the emperor was about to marry another queen, Princess Sicila, but he was assassinated during the wedding ceremony. It was a great irony. Perhaps Sinek felt remorseful before his death, and felt that Samir was the only one he could entrust the throne to. In any case, Samir had become a real queen. In fact, this will was just the icing on the cake. During this period of time, Samir had become the regent of the Assur Empire. She had control over the military forces at the front line, and at the same time, she had the support of the clergy group led by Faust. There were voices of opposition in the Assur Empire when the queen became the empress. There was another proposal from the nobles, which was to support Samir as the regent and make Seneca's 3-year-old son the new emperor. But this proposal was rejected by Seneca's will. There were also nobles who took the opportunity to make things difficult for Samir. Since they couldn't reject Seneca's will, then they would make an issue out of Seneca's assassination. Among these nobles was Lord Mantion, who rushed to Lisbon from Nineveh. The Mantion family was a great noble family of the Assur Empire. There were many local officials and generals who came from this family, and they had a complicated relationship with all kinds of forces in the imperial court. Lord Lloyd was also the highest-ranking official in the empire at present. Lord Mantion's grandfather used to be the prime minister of Assur. After his death, another noble family's representative, Alpha, was given an important position by Sinek and became the prime minister. In the battle between the two families, the Alpha family had the upper hand. Now that the Assur Empire had undergone such a huge change, all kinds of open and veiled struggles had begun. Lord Mantion didn't openly question the legitimacy of Samir's ascension to the throne. In the first court meeting that Samir held, Lord Mantion spoke passionately. In order to maintain the glory of the empire, we must avenge Sinek. But the murderer was Ammonius. Where could they find him? There were two measures that could be taken. The first was for the high priest of the empire, Faust, to pray to Enlil on behalf of the empire, asking the great god to punish the evil gods of the foreign lands. The second measure was for the army to attack the city of Lung, destroy Amon's shrine, occupy the land of the city, and turn the residents into slaves of the empire. The main generals who led the army to conquer the 6 cities of the kingdom of Babylon were all present, but none of them wanted to take on this task. Crossing the treacherous Assur highlands to launch an expedition was a strenuous task in itself. The non-combat losses of the army during the march were very high. Now that they had achieved success and gained a lot of wealth, territory, and slaves, no one wanted to take this risk. The battle between Imral and Valletta had already shown that this battle was not going to be easy. Nearly half of the giant legion had died. Unless the other 4 elite legions of the empire were sent over, and a logistics team several times larger than usual, it would be difficult to win. If they had to fight, it was best to send someone else. This was what the generals were thinking, but no one dared to say it out loud. Lord Montien's words were righteous, and even Samir couldn't refute him on the surface. This was the first problem she faced as soon as she took power. How could she face this kind of questioning? How could she avenge Emperor Cynic? If she didn't accept Lord Montien's suggestion and take convincing measures, her prestige would be greatly affected, and her position as empress might not be stable. The officials all looked at the empress on the throne with different thoughts in their minds. Samir's face was as calm as still water, but no one could tell how he reacted. When Lord Mantion finished speaking, the officials had no choice but to express their support, lest they appear to be disloyal to the empire. Empress Samir nodded and said, Lord Mantion, I want to thank you for your efforts for the empire. You should be rewarded. Samir immediately gave the order to reward Lord Mantion with a new territory and hundreds of slaves. It seemed like a form of appeasement or compromise. After thanking the empress, Lord Mantion said, Your Majesty, I don't want these rewards. I want to ask the empire not to forget the hatred of Emperor Cynic, and the glory we have protected. How do you plan to destroy Palace Ammonius? Samir replied calmly, The war with the Kingdom of Babylon has just ended, and the territories we have conquered need to be stabilized. Currently, the 4 legions can't be mobilized for expeditions. However, Lord Montien's suggestion must also be considered. When it comes to the war with Lung, I know it better than all of you here, because both I and the sage imperial tutor personally went to the battlefield. At that time we lost that battle, and Lung was only a Pyrrhic victory. Their losses were even greater than those of Enral. The Empire's most elite giant legion has already been sent to the plains of Duk. If they can recover their peak combat strength, they will definitely be able to capture Lung, and even conquer the entire plains of Duk. The other 4 legions have achieved such glorious results in attacking the Kingdom of Babylon, so why can't our most elite giant legion do the same? At present, the 2 most important things are confidence and strength. As for confidence, we have all seen it. Lord Mantion is full of confidence in the victory of Enral, so all that's left is strength. From a strategic point of view, we need to organize more adequate logistical support, and we need to organize more soldiers to make up for the losses of the giant legion. I appoint the most loyal and talented minister of the empire, Lord Mantion, to concurrently serve as the governor of Enral, and he will be responsible for avenging His Majesty Cynic. Lord Mantion, I will send the most powerful mage of the empire, Faust, to accompany you to Enral, and I will give you full authority to organize logistics and recruit soldiers from the Assyrian Empire to expand the strength of Enral. I feel the same way as you, and I even want to personally go to the battlefield like I did in the past, but I have to worry about more things in the empire, so I entrust this important matter to you. The Empress actually made such a decision, sending a civil official to Enral to preside over the military affairs. The reactions of the ministers varied. Some were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths, while others wanted to laugh but forced themselves to hold back. Lornard, on the other hand, was stunned on the spot. He had never expected that Samir would ask him to step up instead of another army from the empire. He wanted to decline, but he had no excuse to do so. He was the one who was the happiest. Who else could they send if not him? Some ministers who were quick to react immediately praised Her Majesty's wise decision, and at the same time, praised Montian's loyalty and bravery, and everyone else followed suit. Montian had to go even if he didn't want to. He had built such a high platform for himself, and now he couldn't go back down. To replenish the giant legion and organize logistical reinforcements, manpower and material from the Assyrian mainland would need to be transferred across the plateau. No matter who did this, it would definitely violate the interests of a group of people. It was easy to get someone else to do it, but it was definitely a thankless task to do it personally. It would be fine if they could achieve a complete victory in the plains of Duk and obtain enough benefits, but if they failed or barely won, the losses would definitely outweigh the gains. Since Montian was using this matter to make things difficult, Samir simply sent him to the front lines. Could a civil official from the Ministry of the Interior command an army in battle? In fact, the one who was really in control of the army on the battlefield was still Felix, the giant legion's commander. What Montian could really be responsible for was the most troublesome logistics and people's livelihood. As for the military and political power, he couldn't control it, because Samir had also sent Faust. Chapter 255. Samir then gave a few more orders. She would bring Seneca's coffin back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, and the various legions would shift their focus to ensure the stability of the newly conquered city. The main generals would also follow Seneca's coffin back to Nineveh. After the state funeral, Lohid and Faust would rush to the city of Enril. After that, Samir concluded her first court session and retreated to the back of the palace. Lohid stood in place for a long time without saying a word. When Prime Minister Alpha walked past him, he patted his shoulder and said, "Lord Lohid, you are the new hope of the empire. You are truly a master of both the pen and the sword. The whole nation is looking forward to your new achievements." Faust wanted to see Samir, but the palace servants told him that Her Majesty was tired and sad about the death of Emperor Sinek. She did not want to see anyone in private. Faust had no choice but to silently leave the palace. His residence in the city of Lys was, of course, the most luxurious room in the Enlil shrine, but this supreme mage was not willing to live in the shrine. Even when he passed by the Great Hall, he could not help but cast a magic that concealed his breath, deliberately avoiding the statue on the altar. He tried to comfort himself in his heart. Her Majesty the Empress sent him to Enlil city to let him avoid the divine temple. In Enril, he could live anywhere he wanted, and no one would dare to restrict him. But in the capital, as the chief high priest of the empire and the sage, he had to live in the main shrine and conduct all kinds of rituals in front of the statue of Enril every day. When he faced the statue of Enril, he naturally had a feeling of avoiding it. He even closed his mind so that when he prayed, even the gods could not hear his true thoughts. But on the other hand, Samir had sent him far away from the Saya Plateau. This was a form of alienation, as if Samir did not want to coexist with him in the capital. Although on the surface, Empress Tanuki showed enough respect for this sage imperial tutor, and showed complete trust in him when it came to military affairs, it was all business as usual. Their personal relationship had not changed at all. That was the case on the surface, but Faust knew that Samir had been very tolerant of him, even deliberately sheltering him. Because of the assassination of Sinak, Faust, who was in charge of the magic formation at the time, had to bear the main responsibility. Everyone, including the supreme mage Diego Joe, did not blame Faust for using the air elemental armor. Instead, they were grateful to him for temporarily saving Seneca's life. It was also Faust who pleaded with Samir to spare the guards' lives. However, Faust knew what was going on. He did not necessarily need to use the air elemental armor to block that arrow. His more important goal at that time was to create an opportunity for Gilgamesh to assassinate him. Even if others didn't know the inside story, Queen Samir must have known, but she didn't say anything. She didn't even mention it. There were a few who questioned Faust for failing to protect King Sinek, but they were reprimanded and punished by the queen. Faust still couldn't figure out what kind of attitude Samir had towards him. Her Majesty knew that he had betrayed Sinek and deliberately allowed the assassin to get his hands on the secret that was enough to ruin his reputation, but she didn't punish him. She still allowed him to be the high and mighty sage of the nation. This was her kindness to him. However, Samir had sent Faust to Enril to face a hopeless war that was destined to fail. Was this her punishment for him? On the way back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, following Seneca's coffin, Faust's heart was full of contradictions. In fact, Samir did not treat him coldly, nor did she treat him more intimately than before. But now, the situation had changed. Faust's thoughts and feelings had also changed. He felt that he was further away from the love in his heart, and everything he did was to get closer to it. Faust felt as if his soul had split into two parts, and he was talking to himself. He did bear the main responsibility for Seneca's death, but getting rid of this cruel emperor was his original intention. Now that he had succeeded, he should feel gratified. But why did the feeling of dissatisfaction in his heart grow stronger? The Assyrian Empire's strategy of consolidating and shrinking the front lines was formulated by Faust himself. Enril was to be abandoned in the plan. This was also the strategy that Faust had proposed. Samir had also adopted his decision, so what was wrong with sending him to carry it out? The failure of Enlil City might affect the honor and reputation of the sage imperial preceptor, who was at the front lines. Samuel had sent another scapegoat, Lowered, to take the blame for this future crime. This arrangement was enough to make Faust feel grateful. Since he had followed his heart's desire to assassinate Cynic and reverse the Assyrian Empire's national policy, what was there to be dissatisfied about? But Faust still felt pain. In the dark night he asked himself, Faust, Faust, you have not lost anything, and you have achieved your original intention. You have gotten rid of the cruel emperor and reversed the fate of the empire. Why are you getting more and more depressed? When a seemingly impossible wish came true, the hidden desires in his heart began to sprout. Things that he had never thought about before, even though he knew it was impossible, began to sprout like hopeless seeds. After returning to the city of Nineveh, before the state funeral of Emperor Cynic, Faust, who lived in the main shrine of the empire, endured an inexplicable torment in his heart every night. It was as if the brand left by Satan in his soul was burning him. He was thinking about Samir, but the image of Samir seemed to have become abstract and blurry, becoming the shadow of many women. Her charming smile and delicate body were even accompanied by moans and gasps, causing Faust to shudder. On the other hand, he could not stand the existence of the statue of Enril in the shrine. Although he was not in front of the statue, he knew that the statue was watching everything in the shrine. Samir lived deep in the palace, and Faust had no other opportunity to see her except for routine court discussions. This was normal, because Her Majesty was keeping vigil for Cynic. At this sensitive time, it was not appropriate for her to make any abnormal movements. This made Faust feel inexplicably anxious. Finally, one night, he quietly left the shrine as if he was escaping from something. He disguised himself and appeared in a luxurious brothel in Nineveh. A 9th-level supreme mage was traveling in disguise, so naturally, there would be no flaws. The girls did not know that this white-haired old man with a face full of wrinkles was the respected sage of the empire. Faust was very rich, so he was very generous. The girls were overjoyed, wishing that they could do everything in their power to serve him as he flew to the top of the clouds. Faust was a 9th-level supreme mage in his 50s, but his body was actually as strong as a young man in his early 20s. His youthful vigor that had never been vented before erupted for the first time. He drank a lot of wine, and experienced an unprecedented indulgence in his life. He woke up before dawn. He played with the beautiful naked bodies of the 10 girls in the fragrant pavilion, and placed glittering parangons between their thighs, on their bellies, and in their cleavage. Then he quietly returned to the shrine. No one found out what the sage had done during the night. The next morning, there was a routine sacrificial ceremony, presided over by Faust. The chief high priest of the empire stood by the altar and chanted sacred hymns, but he was completely absent-minded. He felt that he was being absurd, and that everything that happened last night was just a boring emptiness. But when night fell again, he fell into the entanglement of emptiness again. There seemed to be a voice in his soul saying, "Faust, why do you have to do this?" So he quietly left the shrine to find his nightlife. Although the respected sage was the most knowledgeable man in the Assyrian Empire, he had little experience in visiting brothels. Once the floodgates of desire were opened, it was difficult to restrain them. He always went to the same brothel, which was large and luxurious. He was always generous, and the girls were naturally beautiful and charming. Such customers were most welcome in the brothel, but there was one thing that Faust went too far with. Perhaps he did not rely on his wealth, or perhaps he did not even realize how generous he was, but simply indulged himself. Almost all the most beautiful girls in the brothel had accompanied him, and during the days of national mourning for Emperor Cynic, they had spent one passionate night after another. People did not know Faust's identity, only that he was an unattractive little old man, but he spent money in the brothel, and had many beautiful girls accompany him every night. Later on, Faust no longer rotated a different batch of girls every day. At least he had his eye on one of them, and for many days he had her accompany him every night. This was because the girl's facial features vaguely resembled Samir, but she appeared so delicate, and always had a timid and melancholy look. No matter how much money Faust gave her, this girl could not smile at him from the bottom of her heart like other girls. When he took her, he could even feel the trembling and resistance in her heart, and this aroused Faust's desire even more. She was like a flower that needed his nourishment and care. He played in the brothel like this, and no one knew his identity. Sooner or later, he would stir up trouble. Not long after, Faust stirred up trouble, and the cause of it was this girl. There was a young general in the empire who used to frequent this brothel, and some time ago, he followed the army into battle. During this time he returned to the capital with the wealth he gained from the battlefield, and often came to find this girl. In the end, for several days, he heard that the girl was accompanying a little old man. A general who had killed countless people on the battlefield would not have a good temper. Finally, one night, he could not help but call the owner of the brothel to discuss with the customer that he was willing to pay a large sum of money to get the girl to accompany him. But the little old man did not even pay attention to him, not giving him any face as a hero of the empire who had killed countless enemies. So he got drunk and rushed into the room where Faust was. Although it was said that when a warrior faced a mage, a sudden close combat would be more threatening, but it also depended on what kind of warrior faced what kind of mage. Of course, Faust did not bring his staff, and had drunk a little too much. He did not even lift his eyelids from the bed. And with just a gentle wave of his hand, the 6th-level warrior was sent flying through the side wall and injured. This time, the mess was big. A group of soldiers who were on good terms with the general heard the news, and came to settle the score with the little old man. But Faust was nowhere to be found. The owner of the brothel also could not tell where the mysterious and rich little old man came from. As a result, a group of meritorious soldiers who had returned triumphantly from the battlefield tore down one of the brothel's fragrant pavilions, smashed many things, and injured several people. Even the capital's garrison guards were alarmed. This happened 2 days before Cynic was officially buried in the tombs of the Assyrian emperors. Prime Minister Alpha was deeply enraged, and ordered the troublemakers to be severely punished and investigated. The soldiers who had caused trouble had all been dealt with, but where could they go to find that little old man Mao? According to the description, the little old man looked a bit like the sage imperial teacher, but when someone said this, he quickly slapped his own mouth and repeatedly explained that he did not mean to offend him. Interestingly, Amon had also caused trouble in a courtyard in Montefiore, and used this as a pretext to make a fuss. But Faust was different. When he sobered up, he immediately left. It was impossible for him to reveal his identity and cause a ruckus like Amon. He couldn't even let his name leak out, otherwise it would be one of the biggest scandals in the empire in recent times. The reputation and prestige of the sage imperial preceptor had become his betrayal. Faust never went to the brothel again, nor did he see the girl again. 3 days later, he rushed to the city of Enrol with the Minister of the Interior, Lord Loward. After arriving in Enrol, Faust did not live in the shrine, but in the temporary palace that Samir had stayed in. Enlil City doesn't have any brothels, and this sage imperial tutor also felt that his actions in the past few days were absurd. It was as if he didn't know who he was, and he definitely didn't want to mention it again. But every time night came, he felt his soul become even more desolate. He had been used to praying for so many years, but now he did not know who to pray to. He did not want to talk about his experience, but he could not help but think about it. When the girl saw him wave his hand and hit the general who had barged in, her expression was not one of admiration or worship, but one of unconcealable fear. Even her soft body became stiff. He saw his own appearance in the mirror, his face full of wrinkles, and thought of how the general who had barged in was so young and handsome. Perhaps the girl's heart really liked that kind of man? He inexplicably began to pray again, but it was not to call on the gods. "O Suxian, it was you who said, 'My desire is the ruler, and the power you guide is its servant.' Please tell me." Samir knew my feelings but still stayed away from me. Was it because I was not young and handsome enough? Was it because that kind of appearance could attract a woman? Unexpectedly, he actually heard Sudan's response. "I cannot answer this question. Because you cannot decide whether she will fall in love with you or what she is attracted to. But all of this is never without a reason. You can only decide what kind of charm you have. Perhaps you should pray to the god of youth and love, but as far as I know, everything is still up to you. I guide you to a power that can restore your youthful and handsome appearance. And it is not an information jar that can be seen through." This time, it was the real Amon who was speaking. When Faust returned to Enril, Amon also returned to the plains of Duk. He heard Faust's prayer to Sudan, and gave an answer in his soul. At the same time, he also guided Faust's origin power, and also pointed out a special kind of transformation magic. This kind of transformation magic couldn't change a person's life, nor could it turn Faust into another race. However, Faust had enough magic power to show a youthful and handsome appearance when he verified the origin of power from the beginning. In fact, this was a kind of magic to assist in the training of body arts, and it could reshape the bloodline, but the prerequisite was that Faust had to pass tests such as the purity of the body, the purity of the bloodline, the breakthrough of the limit, and so on. Amon left Babylon City 2 months after the death of Hammurabi II. His whereabouts were very secretive, and he blended into the caravan of Nesket and Lee, sitting in a very ordinary carriage, accompanied by Wendy. People only knew that the man and the woman were relatives of Nesket and Lee, and that they were going to follow the caravan to Valung. They did not know that they were Ammonius and the former adoratress of Babylon. Some people were happy, while others were sad. For the great merchant of Uruk, Nesket and Lee, it was really the end of the bitterness and the beginning of the happiness. He had originally set up a business in Marduk City, and cooperated with Madanzo to smuggle military supplies through wandering explorers, including horses, armor, and weapons. At the same time, he also did a business of lending, which was very profitable. So the merchant saw the opportunity and increased his investment, and his business in Marduk City grew bigger and bigger. Not only did it include the smuggling business with Valung, but the newly built Marduk City itself also needed the support of commercial trade. The mayor, Usser, once held a banquet to entertain Nesket, who came to inspect the business, and praised him verbally, promising to find an opportunity to commend his contributions and fight for a noble status for him. But all these beautiful prospects were destroyed by a war. Due to the sudden invasion of the Assyrian Empire from the northeast, the army led by Vonajingzi had to urgently retreat from the west bank of the Euphrates River. Marduk City was broken through by the Hittite army and renamed to Budamia. The mayor of Marduk City also disappeared, and Nesket and Lee suffered heavy losses. The most profitable business was gone, and the title of nobility was even more out of the question. The merchant actually lost a lot of weight. He envied Scio in Montefiore City, because he made friends with Ammonius during the war. Scio was now not only one of the top merchants in Lower Igut, but also the deputy director of the Department of Property of Montefiore City. He had the title of nobility, and was allowed to buy a large piece of land. And his talent in business was no less than that of Scio. Why was he so unlucky? Chapter 256. Of course, this was also Amon's idea. Before Amon left Babylon City, he had discussed some matters with Binut. He wanted to restore trade between Babylon City and the Kingdom of Babylon. Amon had obtained a large sum of money in Babylon City, and this money was useless in his hands. He should organize the most urgently needed goods to be transported to Babylon City. Now, if he wanted to open trade with Babylon City, He needed the permission of the Hittite kingdom to pass through Budamia city. This could be discussed between the kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite kingdom. Restoring trade would benefit both sides. Of course, the experienced Neskit was the best candidate to restore trade, and so Neskit and his career soared overnight. He rushed to the capital to thank Benut I, who encouraged him to set an example and restore trade with the Hittite kingdom and the plains of Duk. The relationship between the two countries had now eased, and this was also a policy adjustment made by Benut after he succeeded to the throne. First, he admitted his weak position after the defeat, and then focused on restoring the people's livelihood and economy. Neskit had become the new lordly of the kingdom, and his caravan would naturally be given special care, and there were generally no checks when entering or leaving the border. But Neskit was a merchant, and he was very good at doing things. Whenever his caravan carried goods that might be prohibited, he would give some benefits to the officials and soldiers at the border, and would not use his status to oppress people. The caravan that Amon followed was already the fourth caravan that Neskit had sent to Babylon city. He did not follow the first caravan back to Babylon city, because he did not want to attract too much attention. The journey was indeed uneventful. Wendy was like a bird released from its cage, lifting the curtain to look at the outside world. Anything could make her happy. With a smile, Amon told Wendy that if she was good at gardening, she could go to a divine palace called the Garden of Eden to do what she liked. If she preferred to stay in Babylon, Amon would also make arrangements. When Aesop and George saw Amon come back safe and sound, they were naturally very surprised. But when they saw the beautiful Wendy beside Amon, they were very surprised. They had wanted to discuss matters with the god in the palace of Ammonius, but the carriage took a sudden turn, and went to the town in the city where the Dishans lived. They temporarily placed Wendy in the small building where Maya had lived, and then went to the backyard of Amon's home, to talk to the god. Amon gave a brief account of his experiences during this period of time, and handed over a huge sum of wealth to Aesop in a spatial magic tool. Aesop naturally wouldn't use the spatial artifact, so he let George keep it for the time being. He exclaimed, "Oh my god, you're really omnipotent. You've saved Tulingcheng's life." Now we don't lack manpower or material resources to evacuate Lung, but we lack money. George smiled and said, "My Ammonius, the more time I spend with you, the more I admire you from the bottom of my heart. This is really a miracle that no one can imagine. You actually brought the adoratress from the gate of the divine Babylon. Wendy is not here. Let me ask you in private, how are you going to arrange for her? Do you want to tell Morin?" Amon glared at George and replied, "You underestimate a god. Do you think she doesn't know? Wendy is a very capable girl. She won't live here for nothing. As for whether she wants to stay in Tulingcheng or go to the Garden of Eden, you have to ask her." Just now, Aesop said that we don't lack manpower or material resources, but now the scale of Tulingcheng is much larger than before. Lord Aesop is overworking himself. What we really lack are talents to govern the city. Aesop hurriedly added, "It's not that I'm overworking myself, it's what I should do and I'm willing to do. I just wanted to tell you something. Two very capable people came to Tulingcheng not long ago. I want to put them in an important position, but their identities are very special, and I was just about to ask for your opinion." Amon asked with great interest, "Who are they to receive such a high evaluation from Lord Aesop?" George replied with a smile, "Ammonius, they're both old acquaintances of yours. One is the former Lord of Marduk, Usser, and the other is the former chief quartermaster of the Babylon army, Dikairo. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the two of them fled in the chaos and ended up being prisoners of war among the defeated soldiers of the Uruk Legion. Their identities were well hidden, and they were never recognized. Later on, the 1,000 or so Uruk Legion prisoners were sent to Tulingcheng by Princess Cilia and Lord Goliath, and they were recognized by Madanzo. So it's these two. They really are old acquaintances of Amon, and they're both very capable. Dikairo used to be the mayor of Akkad, a small town in the state of Kish in the kingdom of Babylon. During the rescue mission of Princess Sicila, he had accomplished a seemingly impossible task, demonstrating his outstanding organizational skills and political talent. At that time, both Prince Binut and Princess Sicila appreciated him very much, and both wanted to recruit him for their own use. Prince Binut acted even faster, promoting him to the city of Kish. Later on, when Prince Binut gained control of the army, he promoted him to chief quartermaster. As for Usser, he was the leader of the Highland giant tribe that kidnapped Princess Sisela. It was indeed not easy for him to organize the Highland giants, who were all brawn and no brains, into a coordinated operation. Later on, he built the city of Marduk in the southeast corner of the plains of Duk, which was more than enough to prove his ability to govern a city. However, Usser and Aman still had some history. He had once stopped the Dushans from returning to their hometown under the orders of Marduk. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the two of them fled to the banks of the Babylon River, but before they could cross the river, they were captured by the Hittite army and the Uruk Legion that followed. They mixed in with the Uruk Legion prisoners of war, and became Hittite slaves, but their identities were not exposed. Gilgamesh once asked Goliath and Aman for help in rescuing the Uruk Legion prisoners of war. Later, under the mediation of Goliath and Princess Sisela, these prisoners of war became slaves bestowed by the king of Hittite to the cold prince Aman. At the same time, Uruk also paid the Hittite army a nominal sum of money at a very low price, and brought these more than 1,000 people to Uruk. According to Aman's intention, they should be given freedom and be allowed to decide whether to stay or leave. But Aesop very much hoped that this group of people would stay. The Uruk Legion was once the most powerful legion on the continent. These people were prisoners of war from this legion, and if they were incorporated into the Uruk Legion and trained a little, they would be able to burst out with powerful combat power. So Aesop provided very generous conditions. First, he conveyed the oracle of Ammonius, announcing that they had regained their freedom, and promised that as long as they were willing to stay and swear loyalty to the city of Salem, they would be given fertile land, farm tools, food seeds, and building materials. A few hundred of them chose to return to the city of Uruk, while the other half stayed. Among the people who stayed, Madanzo occasionally found Usser and Tich. Usser did not return to Babylon because he did not dare to go back. Binut, who first grasped the power of the kingdom and later ascended the throne, was modest but tough, and some of his policies were quite harsh and not negotiable. He once issued an order that if the people fled in the face of an enemy attack, they would not be held accountable, but if the city lords and garrison generals fled without permission, they would be executed and all their property confiscated. Even Binut's trusted aides could not be pardoned. Of the 6 cities that were captured by the Assyrian army, 1 city lord died in battle, 2 surrendered and were captured, and the other 3 fled before the Assyrian army arrived. As a result, they were all executed by Prince Binut in front of everyone. And then he issued the following order. Usser was also a city lord who had escaped. Although it was because the city was breached, he did not receive Prince Binut's order to retreat. There was a reason for it, and he had tried his best, but he still could not escape punishment. Moreover, Princess Sisela had left, and he had lost his backer in the political world of the kingdom, so he naturally did not want to return to Babylon. As for Tich, he happened to be in the city of Marduk at that time, and he was ordered to temporarily help Usser defend the city. Although he was also responsible, Binut may not punish him severely, but he himself did not want to go back. The former mayor had a kind of aristocratic pride in his bones. Being defeated and captured was a kind of humiliation for him, and it was the freedom that the city of Selling gave him. According to aristocratic etiquette, he should swear allegiance to the city of Selling, so he chose to stay. After hearing this, Aman smiled and said, Aesop, in fact, either one of these 2 people has the ability to govern a city. Congratulations on having 2 capable assistants. They are fully capable of serving as the director of the city, and you will also be able to relax a lot. Now that Aman had become a god, he rarely interfered with the mundane affairs of the human world. After attaining the realm of transcendence and immortality, his perspective and mentality had also become detached. After a brief chat, he let Aesop deal with it himself. When Wendy asked Aman where she wanted to go, she did not hesitate to answer the Garden of Eden. The girl's idea was very interesting to Aman. She hoped to return to the human world in the gate of the divine god, but after seeing the real god Aman, and hearing that there was a divine palace in the human world, She naturally wanted to go to the Garden of Eden. Amon asked George to send Wendy to the Garden of Eden first, and told the disciples to wait in the Garden of Eden. He would arrive in a few days, and once again disappeared in front of the mortals. Of course, Amon wanted to go back to the Garden of Eden, but he did not want to walk with George and Wendy, which could easily expose his whereabouts. And Enrol must be paying attention to his whereabouts at all times, so it was not the time to lure the fish to the bait. And it was during this time that Faust came to Enrol again, heard Sudan's voice, and gave him the latest guidance of power. Wendy entered the Garden of Eden for the first time, and the amazement in her heart was almost indescribable. She never dreamed that there was such a beautiful, peaceful, and magical world in the world. In her mind, this was the kingdom of heaven where the gods lived. Since ancient times, those who could enter the divine palace of the gods in the human world were the oracles guided by the gods. Generally, they could only enter the divine palace when they were about to master the 8th level of the power of origin and pass the test of losing power. Without exception, they were all great achievers in the human world. As for the disciples, some of them had entered the Garden of Eden before reaching this realm, and they were considered exceptions. Of course, people like Wendy who could enter the divine palace without any training were the exceptions among the exceptions. In the Garden of Eden, the disciples of Amon were also quite welcoming and took care of Wendy, an ordinary girl in the human world, because she was Ammonius woman. Whether it was or not, Amon had lived with her in the gate of God for so long, and he had abducted the former adoratress of Baron from Marduk's place, and ordered George to personally send her to the Garden of Eden. Didn't he have to go? He couldn't deny it even if he wanted to. The disciples also pondered in their hearts. Morin probably wouldn't be happy to see Amon do this, but this was something for the gods themselves to worry about, and the disciples couldn't interfere. And for Wendy, the days spent in the Garden of Eden were the happiest of her life. The people here were so beautiful, handsome, happy and kind, and they all called themselves angels. And there was a big difference between them and mortals. They all had wings. Amon hadn't been back for half a year, so why did the disciples all have wings, and even call themselves angels? The story had to start with Michael and Seagull. Seagull's injuries had healed under Cecilia's careful treatment, and he returned to the Garden of Eden. He had once transformed into a giant bird on the battlefield. The scene was very dazzling, and he had achieved unexpected results. Amon had taught Faust a form of transformation magic to reconstruct the bloodline, and his disciples naturally knew it too. Later, Seagull didn't want to always transform into a giant bird, so he cultivated a pair of wings that could appear at any time, and could display all kinds of magical powers, looking very impressive. These wings were originally the wings of a seagull, with some gray spots at the tips. Once he left the Garden of Eden and flew to the city of Meso to see Cecilia, and showed this pair of wings, but Cecilia said that pure white looked better. As a result, when he returned to the Garden of Eden, the wings had become very beautiful pure white, like a luxurious cloak behind him. Link felt that Seagull's appearance was very cool, even cooler than the always cool Madanzo, so he also cultivated such wings. The rest of the disciples also felt that this kind of cultivation was very interesting, so everyone cultivated pure white wings. Madanzo passed the test of endless arising and ceasing cycle, and became a 9th level divine emissary, and Gabriel passed this test almost at the same time as him. In fact, Gabriel had already vaguely comprehended this state of mind after the fall of Saintess Maria, and after the Battle of Taling and Emerald City, he really comprehended this state of mind. She also went to the Garden of Eden to cultivate, and became a 9th level divine emissary. According to the customs of the various divine clans in the continent, 9th level divine emissaries were already called gods on earth, but in their hearts, Amon was the only god who guided their faith. So the disciples discussed one thing together. If one of them achieved the realm of eternal life in the future, how should they call themselves? As a result, everyone learned from the current practice of the Ennead and unanimously decided that no matter what realm they reached, they would call themselves angels. Later, some people saw the pure white wings of the angels and thought they were the wings of white pigeons, but in fact they were the wings of seagulls. As the leader of Amon's disciples, Madanzo's wings were different, and when he spread his wings he did not look like a big white pigeon, but more like a blazing firebird. Madanzo had always liked to have a cool image, and even when he became a 9th-level divine emissary, this temper did not change. He had seen the god of fire of the Anunnaki divine clan, and felt that the appearance of that flame was very arrogant, and had long vowed that one day he would overshadow the limelight of the god of fire. He also told Link and the others that he was the captain of Ammonius' guards and had led 36 generals of the guards, and now that he had become a 9th-level divine emissary, when he cultivated 36 fire wings, it would represent the perfection of his magic power and realm, and he would usher in the test of transcending eternal life. And Link teased him, saying that when the time came, he would be like a chicken on fire. Just half a month after Wendy arrived in the Garden of Eden, Ammonius finally met the disciples again. He didn't fly to this place. Instead, like a wandering hunter, he crossed the Euphrates Valley on foot. Even the gods couldn't detect his presence. But one goddess seemed to have a premonition, and as soon as Ammon stepped into the Garden of Eden, before he could say a few words to the disciples, Murin arrived with the elf maid Shebra. The disciples hurried to welcome the goddess of youth and love, while Ammon stepped forward and gave the goddess a gentle and warm hug, saying softly, "You Namna, I finally see you again." In front of the disciples, Murin gave Ammon face, holding his arm with a coquettish and reserved smile, and greeted the divine emissaries in the Garden of Eden. After letting go of Ammon's hand, she took Wendy's hand and exclaimed, "You are that girl, right? The adoratress of Baron who was brought out of the divine gate by Ammon." In front of another god, Wendy was still a little timid, but the legendary goddess of youth and love had always been worshipped by the women on the continent, and now she was standing in front of her, looking so familiar. Wendy felt like she was dreaming. She raised her head and replied, "I am no longer the adoratress of Baron, I am Wendy. Thank you, Ammon, and thank you, my goddess." Murin took Wendy's hand and asked her for a long time. In front of the goddess, the innocent girl answered all her questions respectfully. Then Murin asked Shebra to talk to Wendy, introducing her to the divine palace of Murin, which was also what Ammon called Unamna's Rose Garden. The goddess claimed that she had something important to discuss with Ammon, and called Ammon alone to the belly of the mountain where he usually cultivated. The goddess was, after all, a goddess. It was obvious that she was not happy that Ammon brought Wendy back, and there was nothing to hide between the gods. But she did not pull Ammon's ear and shout like the women in the mortal world. "You devil! I was worried about you at home, but you were fooling around outside." Instead, she sat there and looked at Ammon, and said in a faint tone, "I heard that you were hurt by the god of flame and the god of ash. Enril must have seen through you. He will definitely find a chance to kill you, and you still have the leisure to do so?" Chapter 257. 238. Imperial Killer Yun Namna raised her eyebrows slightly and glared at Ammon. "I'm not unhappy, but can you expect me to be happier? I don't want to listen to other people's stories, tell me what happened in person." Ammon imprinted a piece of information into Yun Namna's soul, telling her everything he had experienced during this period of time without any reservation. Yun Namna looked at Ammon with a studying gaze for a while, and suddenly covered her mouth and laughed. "You're really something, coming back after taking a lot of advantage of Marduk. But what you are going to do is very dangerous. You must be careful and plan carefully. As for that girl Wendy." At this point she stopped talking. Ammon had to ask, "What's wrong with Wendy? Don't you want to see her? I have explained the cause and effect clearly, and Marduk asked me to make another request, but I still chose to take her away. Even when I first saw her, even if I knew you would be unhappy now, I would still make the same choice." Yun Namna was not only the goddess of youth and love in the Anunnaki divine clan, but also the goddess of war. She suddenly said to Ammon, "Why are you sitting so far away? Can't you sit a little closer?" Ammon's figure disappeared from the opposite seat and appeared beside Murin. The goddess of war stretched out a hand and used her divine power to pinch Ammon, while Ammon looked at her with a nonchalant smile. Murin added, "This girl is very good. Even I sympathize with her. If someone else takes her out of the divine gate, I would be very happy." Maybe I would take her away when I see her. If she wasn't so pure and kind, why would I hold her hand and talk so much? I want to discuss something with you. Would you be willing to borrow someone from the Garden of Eden to do gardening in my rose garden? Aman laughed. You want to take Wendy to the rose garden? As long as she is willing, it's fine, but why do you have this idea? Isn't Shubra taking care of the rose garden? She's much better than Wendy. Morin pinched him again and snorted. You still have the nerve to talk about Shubra? Your disciples are the same as you. You abducted the saintess of Baron, and your disciple, Moses, abducted my elven maidservant, Shubra. Aman frowned and said, It can't be. How can there be such a thing? As far as I know, Shubra has always been in your rose garden, not in the Garden of Eden. Yun Namna pouted and said, The person was not abducted, but the heart was. You haven't been around during this time, so of course you don't know the situation. Shubra has asked me several times, hoping that she can come to the Garden of Eden to help build the garden. I knew what she was thinking, so I brought her along this time. Aman smiled again. That's a good thing. Thank you for helping me. When has my Yun Namna ever suffered a loss? Sending a Shubra means taking away a Wendy, as long as she is willing. Yun Namna looked at him with a faint smile and said, As the goddess of youth and love, do you think I can't persuade a girl? Wendy will be happy to go with me, and I will personally guide her and train her to be the oracle of the rose garden. If she is not so lucky, then a mortal can live a short life of a few decades in happiness. This should satisfy you, right? Aman reached out and pulled her into his arms, bowed his head and said, Thank you, my goddess. Yun Namna suddenly burst into laughter in front of his chest and said, My Ammonius, the famous Ammonius, do you know you have a new nickname? Aman was stunned and asked in reply, What nickname? At the same time he muttered in his heart, Could it be a nickname like Casanova, or something like that? Yun Namna poked Aman's chest with her finger and said, The Emperor Killer of the World. This nickname had indeed just spread on the mainland. The former king of Babylon, Hammurabi II, had seen Ammonius in the palace and died the next morning. Somehow, this matter had spread to the people and many people had heard of it. It could be said that Aman had sent away a total of several emperors. He once captured the former king of Hittite, Lucier, but Lucier died shortly after returning to the capital. He also personally drove the carriage of the pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, and led the army back to Montefiore. And the pharaoh let Aman follow him directly to his territory, but after returning to Thebes he suddenly died. As for the emperor of Assur, there was no need to mention. According to the announcement of the Assur Empire, this invincible emperor died of serious injuries in a battle with Ammonius. All the emperors of the 4 countries on the continent soon passed away after seeing Aman. In fact, none of them were killed by Aman, but it was too much of a coincidence to link these events together. So Ammonius gained the title of Emperor Killer of the human world. After this title spread, it was estimated that when the emperors of the various countries heard the name of Ammonius, they would be scared to death, lest this god would come to them. Ammonius and Murin stayed in the palace in the belly of the mountain for a few days and nights. No one knew what they were discussing, but the disciples did not dare to disturb them. After a few days, the 2 of them came out. Murin asked Wendy with a smile if she would like to follow her to the rose garden. No one knew what she said to the girl, but Wendy happily agreed. So Murin left the Garden of Eden with Wendy and returned to her own palace, but left Shubra in the Garden of Eden. After leaving the Euphrates Valley, Murin appeared high in the sky. A white cloud carried her and Wendy forward. Wendy's eyes widened as she looked at the rivers and mountains under her feet. She was actually flying in the clouds with a god. She almost forgot to close her mouth along the way. If there were divine emissaries spying in the dark, they would have seen this scene clearly, and would have been able to see Wendy beside Murin. Murin was still talking to Wendy in a low voice on the clouds. A few days ago, Shubra had introduced the situation in the rose garden in detail to Wendy, and Murin told Wendy what she was going to do in the rose garden. She also said that Aman often went there, and that such a palace was a good place for gods to recuperate on earth. After Aman finished dealing with the matters in Salem on earth, it would not be long before he came to the rose garden. At that time, She hoped that Wendy would be able to cultivate the most beautiful flowers in the world to welcome Amon. The goddess took Wendy and talked all the way, looking at the scenery from the clouds, and floated into the palace of the rose garden. Even if they did not show themselves, flying in the clouds for so long would definitely be noticed by the gods. Amon also left the Garden of Eden soon after, disappearing into the mountains without a trace. After another period of time, a man dressed as a wandering hunter came out of the jungle of the Euphrates Valley, leaning on a tree-like cane, and began to climb the steep Assyrian plateau, disappearing into the rocky cliffs. This man was Ammonius, and he really kept his promise and rushed to the palace of Murin, but he did not want to be discovered flying in the sky. When he reached the top of the desolate plateau, he could no longer cover himself as a wandering hunter, because no hunter would run to such a place to hunt. So Amon used his stealth magic again, and walked across the peaks of the lofty plateau. The snow that never melted all year round did not leave his footprints, nor did the glaciers that stretched across the peaks reflect his figure. Climbing the plateau to the palace of Murin, there were still 3,000 miles to go, and Amon had just walked a short distance when he suddenly sensed a faint, almost imperceptible wave of detection magic sweeping over. He immediately stopped and turned away, his figure like a wisp of smoke rushing into a deep valley. Although his reaction was quick, it was too late. Enril had been waiting for him for a long time, and he had sent his emissaries who were best at stealth and detection to guard the area leading to the palace of Murin. This was the place where Amon was most likely to appear. These emissaries were not necessarily good at fighting, and if Amon noticed that his whereabouts were exposed and wanted to escape, they might not be able to catch up, but they could inform Enril at once. Not only that, but Enril also sent emissaries to watch the vicinity of the palace of Murin. If Murin made a move, this god would immediately be informed. His purpose was to make it too late for Murin to save Amon, and at the same time, to give Amon no chance to send out a distress signal. Enril waited for more than half a year, and today he finally succeeded. As Amon was walking in the mountains and wastelands, he suddenly sensed a faint wave of detection magic sweeping over a large area indiscriminately, and realized that he might have been discovered. His reaction was very fast, and he immediately turned into a wisp of green smoke, turned around, and flew away, falling into a deep valley and quietly hiding. If the target of the other party's detection was him, they might not have found his exact location, so they might be able to avoid the search. But Amon immediately realized that he had not escaped, and the other party had found his exact location. Because in the distant horizon, thick smoke and flames were flying towards him, one on the left and one on the right, and their target was the deep valley where he was hiding. It was the god of flames, Kibir, and the god of ashes, Nugus, who he had fought before. Amon did not intend to meet the two divine emissaries face to face, and as soon as he saw them coming from the horizon, he decisively decided not to hide anymore. Turning into a golden light, and flying out of the deep valley towards the southern part of the Saya Plateau, he wanted to escape back to the plains of Duk as soon as possible, and his speed was obviously much faster than the god of flames and the god of ashes, so it was impossible for the two divine emissaries to catch up. The golden light that Amon had turned into was almost close to the ground, flying at low altitude like a bolt of lightning, and soon left the god of flames and the god of ashes behind, but Amon did not slow down in the slightest. The mountains gradually lowered, and they were almost at the edge of the Saya Plateau. Another huge mountain range appeared in the distance, the last barrier through the Saya Plateau to the plains of Duk. The mountains were high and rugged, and lush jungles grew halfway up the mountains, and the cliffs and precipices were covered with cracks and caves of various sizes. Amon no longer continued to fly close to the ground, and the golden light refracted and shot straight into the sky. He could sense that the divine emissaries chasing after him had been left behind by 1,000 miles, and the detection magic that had been locking onto him had also disappeared. His next step was to step directly into the eternal void of life and death. However, at this moment he suddenly heard a cold shout in his soul. "Amon, do you still want to escape?" With this shout, the heavenly god Enril appeared high in the sky with a long whip in his hand, and a powerful pressure spread out, firmly locking onto Amon's figure. After receiving the news, Enril did not come from afar to track Amon. but directly appeared high in the sky to block his way. Behind Amon, there was the god of flames and the god of ashes chasing after him, and in front of him was a tall mountain range, which was turning into a golden light refracting into the sky. The gods were not so long-winded in their attacks, and with that shout, Enril had already lashed out with his whip. Within the range of the divine power of the gods, there seemed to be no distance or hindrance. With a wave of his whip, Amon's figure had already been locked onto by a powerful pressure. If it had been an ordinary person, they would have been scared out of their wits at this moment. But if Enril wanted to kill another god, he would have to hit him directly. The shepherd's long whip unfolded in the sky, but it did not make a sound. At the same time, all the sounds in the world disappeared, and the mountains on the plateau and the clouds in the sky seemed to tremble silently. The long whip was like a huge question, chasing after Amon in search of an answer. Amon, who had experienced hundreds of battles, had experienced countless life and death dangers, but there had never been a more hair-raising experience than this one. His reaction could not be any faster, and he abruptly stopped in midair. The golden light that enveloped his body instantly turned into a golden armor. He pulled out the eye of ceiling and swung it upwards, as if annihilating all the power in midair, forming a vacuum that could swallow everything. As he swung his sword, Amon turned around and dove down, rushing headfirst into the cliff of the huge mountain range in front of him. It was a cliff thousands of feet high halfway up the mountain, and the height was near the snowline. Due to years of glaciers covering and melting, the erosion marks formed had left the huge cliff riddled with cracks, and the rock layers were very severely weathered. The cave structure in the mountain was quite complex, and it was a very suitable place for hiding. If Amon hid quietly in the depths of the mountain before Enril arrived and locked onto him, it would be difficult for even a god to find him unless the entire cliff was blown down. But now that Enril had his eyes on him, it would be difficult for him to escape even if he did so, and he was obviously just trying to fight for that slim chance of survival while escaping. Looking at Amon's momentum, he wanted to crash into the mountain, but of course he did not want to kill himself, but wanted to rely on the strong body of a god to drill into the depths of the mountain like a drill. With such a majestic mountain range, it was absolutely impossible for him to escape to the plains of Duk under Enril's pursuit, but he could rely on the mountain to defend and counterattack, trying to hold on until reinforcements arrived. Murin might come to save him, and this was Amon's only choice at the moment. Amon's figure flew towards the cliff in front of him, and Enril's whip struck the vacuum that annihilated everything behind him. The long whip coiled into a spiral shape, and with a huge force, it instantly straightened and bounced off, and under the clear sky, a thunderous roar came from the plateau, shattering the vacuum created by Amon. Then Enril's figure teleported from high in the air to the tip of the long whip, and the tip of the whip strangely turned into a whip shaft that appeared in his hand, and he swung it forward again with all his might. This long whip did not draw a trajectory in the air, and what Enril swung out was a pervasive force, and his figure followed this force straight towards Amon. Even if Amon had the magical eye of sealing, he would not be able to annihilate it, let alone cut open a spatial rift to escape to another place, and the powerful aura that pervaded the air was almost unparalleled. Enril did not seem to move at all, but time and space seemed to have become distorted, and the huge cliff seemed to be rushing towards him. No matter how Amon's figure flew, it was getting closer and closer. The whip seemed to be hovering in place, but Amon seemed to be flying forward and retreating, and was about to be firmly entangled by the whip. This was the magic of Enril as the creator. Although the means did not seem to be different from the changes of the world's top divine arts, the way it was used and the powerful force was not something that Amon could resist. Since he had already made his move, it was impossible to let Amon leave alive. Even if Murin, who was far away in the divine palace of Murin, wanted to save Amon, it was simply too late. The whip was just a little bit away from wrapping around Amon, and Enril's motionless figure was already standing in front of the cliff, while Amon slammed into the mountain fiercely. A piece of rubble and dust flew everywhere, and the long whip straightened and shot into the mountain rocks, and in the next moment, it would pierce through Amon. At this moment, Enril's expression changed. He was keenly aware that at the moment when Amon crashed into the cliff, The falling rubble was accompanied by an unusual burst of divine power. This was not a divine art that Amon himself had performed, and its power was simply insignificant in the eyes of a god like Enril, but the range was extremely wide, forming a shock wave that instantly spread throughout the entire cliff. The premonition of a god was beyond the imagination of mortals. The long whip in Enril's hand did not continue to chase after Amon, and in an instant, it turned from 1 to 9. Some were flames, some were thick smoke, some were a storm, some were like a spatial boundary, and some were the condensation of various elemental forces. They spread out in all directions like a ponytail, not only to block all possible attacks in the air, but also to form a spiral barrier that tightly wrapped around his body. This god's reaction was too fast, because the majestic peak let out a terrifying roar, and suddenly collapsed towards him. There was actually a trap here. Even Enril did not notice it just now. This trap was not set by Amon. This area had long been monitored by Enril's oracles, and he had no time or opportunity to set any trap against Enril. In fact, this trap was set against Amon, for years ago when Murin's ex-husband, Dums, and Enril's dark wolf god, Moonlit Night, attempted to capture Amon. Chapter 258. When Amon Shanglei became a god, Dums thought that he could not withstand a single blow and wanted to capture him directly and send him to the underworld to exchange for his sister Peloponnes. But Bright Moon Night had suffered a loss from Amon and knew how powerful he was. She reminded Dums to make a backup plan. If he was no match, he would deliberately escape and lead Amon here. There was a very clever trap laid between the cliffs of this huge mountain range. The core of this trap was only a small magic circle. If it was not touched, there was almost no abnormality. It required a very powerful magic to detonate in an instant, and then the entire mountain wall would collapse. This magic circle also had another function, which was to instantly connect the power generated by the collapsing mountain wall into one. Even a god who had transcended eternal life would probably end up badly if he was caught off guard. After Amon captured Bright Moon Night alive, he released the seriously injured Bright Moon Night and took Dums to the underworld to exchange for Peloponnes. But this trap was still there untouched, as if it had been forgotten. Bright Moon Night, who made the trap, did not expect that one day Amon would use it against Enril. The landslide itself could not hurt a god like Enril, who had the achievement of the creator. Even if a mountain collapsed and buried him, Enril could turn into a green smoke and come out unscathed. But Bright Moon Night set up this trap in order to deal with a powerful existence like a god. Its main function was not to use the falling rocks to hurt people, but to connect the power of the landslide into a powerful energy shock, binding and attacking the opponent who fell into the trap. Enril saw the opportunity very quickly. The whip shadow had already whipped the collapsed mountain wall into powder, forming an independent moving space. But the powerful impact of the condensed force actually forcibly collapsed this divine space. The shock wave that could almost smash everything into powder directly hit the whip that was wrapped around Enlil's body in a spiral shape, and even the sky seemed to tremble with an echo. Enril fell into the trap, but where was Amon? When the cliff collapsed, where was the safest place? Of course, in the half of the mountain that had not collapsed. It was like hiding under a roof when it was raining. Amon held the eye of ceiling in his hand and turned it into a sharp drill, drilling directly into the depths of the mountain. After the landslide, his figure appeared again in the newly formed precipice, and he swung his sword towards the chaotic world where Enril was. It was still a powerful sealing force. Amon was afraid that the trap set by Bright Moon Night was not effective enough, so he added more force and compressed all the energy shock of the landslide together and blasted it towards Enril. When Amon swung his sword, the countless falling boulders and the huge mountain stopped in the air for a moment, as if the power of the collapse had been sucked out and shifted, and then continued to collapse. Amon only swung his sword once, but this time he used his strongest power, and then his figure turned into a golden light shooting straight towards the sky, not even looking at Enril who had fallen into the trap. A gray vortex appeared in the sky, and black lightning struck out from the vortex, hitting Amon's body in a way that could not be blocked or avoided. Amon's figure was wrapped in a faint golden light, and he staggered into the eternal void, disappearing from the human world. As soon as Amon escaped, there was a loud crack, and countless whip shadows lashed out from the smoke and dust, forcibly breaking the trap and the sealing force that Amon had applied. The mountain wall not far away was hit by this energy, and a large part of it collapsed. Countless boulders flew in all directions, and Enrol's figure was revealed again. He looked very miserable, his hair disheveled, and his leather robe was torn in several places. The long whip had been destroyed, and the long whip had been broken into countless pieces and scattered along with the rubble at the foot of the mountain. There was only a bare whip in his hand. Enrol was indeed astonishingly powerful. He destroyed this magical weapon that had been refined into one with his body and forcibly broke through the restraints of the trap and escaped. However, as soon as his figure appeared, and the dust that pervaded the plateau had not yet dispersed, suddenly an aura more terrifying than the landslide firmly locked onto him. At this moment, Enrol's feeling was much more horrifying than when Amon suddenly encountered him. At this moment, he was at his weakest, and the strength of the person who came was much stronger than him. It was his archenemy Marduk. Marduk's burly and muscular figure was already standing high in the sky, and he said coldly, "Enrol, to think that you would have such a day." When he spoke, he did not give Enrol the slightest chance to breathe, and he waved a long sword in his hand and fiercely chopped down, accompanied by the omnipresent roar of power in all directions. The sword in Marduk's hand was only slightly more than 4 feet long, and the shining blade had snow-like patterns on it. The color was actually dark and snow-white, and the sharp blade also had subtle wave-like patterns that could not be seen with the naked eye. The sword slashed down from the sky and turned into a ray of light that was hundreds of feet long, and the crisscrossing light and darkness brought with it an extremely violent shock, cutting the space into countless fragments, and the buzzing sound even shattered the falling gravel in the distance into flying mist. Faust was presiding over a ceremony in the shrine, representing the giant legion to offer sacrifices to Enrol, calling upon the gods to bestow power upon them, so that this elite legion that had once struck terror into the hearts of their enemies would be filled with fighting spirit again. The main generals of the legion and the governor of the city, Loheward, were all kneeling in front of the statue. Faust held a staff in his hand and recited a hymn. The atmosphere in the hall was mysterious and solemn. In the perception of this peak 9th level supreme mage, the statue of Enrol on the altar was not just a cold stone, but like a living and incredible god standing there. It was precisely because of this that Faust wanted to avoid such occasions. However, with his identity, he had no choice but to be around all day long, presiding over these ceremonies under the gaze of the god. There was a kind of anxiety in his heart that ordinary people could not understand. However, an abnormal situation occurred today. Faust, who was reciting the hymn, heard a strange sound in his soul, as if something had shattered, and the source of the sound was the majestic statue of Enrol on the altar. The statue was still the statue of Enrol, and there seemed to be no change to the naked eye. However, the invisible perception attached to its body had shattered at this moment, as if a living life had instantly turned into a cold, human-shaped boulder. Faust's prayer was actually interrupted at this moment. This was a situation that had never happened before. If it was an ordinary priest who had made such a mistake, he would definitely have been reprimanded and punished. But of course, the crowd did not dare to reprimand or question the sage imperial advisor. They also felt that something was wrong, but could not pinpoint what was wrong. One by one, they quietly raised their gazes. Some looked at Faust with puzzled eyes, while others looked at the statue in the center of the hall with puzzled and perplexed eyes. Faust's face was pale as if he was sick, and flushed as if he was drunk. When he came back to his senses, he immediately returned to his normal demeanor. He lightly coughed twice, as if reminding everyone to maintain etiquette. With a solemn tone, he continued to recite the hymn to the god. That deep and extremely infectious voice once again reverberated in the hall, and the ceremony continued. The god of flames, Kibir, and the god of ashes, Nugus, had been left hundreds of miles behind by Amon, but they were still in hot pursuit along the distant mountains. Suddenly, they heard an earth-shattering sound coming from the horizon. Even from so far away, they could feel the terrifying aura. The distant whistling seemed to pierce directly into their souls. It was the power of Marduk's demonic blade. Although it was not aimed at them, the aura still made them tremble. The thick smoke and flames paused in the air, and then something in their souls disappeared. It was an imprint of an oath, which had existed in their souls many years ago when they accepted the guidance of Enril to join the Anunnaki divine clan. As long as Enril was still alive, they would carry out the various tasks of the divine clan. This was both a kind of restraint and a natural sense of mission in the oath. But at this moment, there was suddenly an indescribable change, as if they had returned to how they were before they joined the divine clan. What happened? Could it be that Enril had fallen? How could this be possible? In a faraway place, the dark wolf god Mingyue had been quietly healing his injuries on an isolated island with beautiful scenery outside the estuary of the Euphrates River and the Lys River. He had attempted to assassinate Amon twice but failed, and both times he escaped with injuries, not only because Amon had injured him, but also because the excessive use of that violent power had brought great damage to his body. Especially the first time he had not fully recovered, and the second time he had followed Dums to plot against Amon. As a result, he was beaten so badly that he could barely get up, and there was not a single part of his body that was not marked with pain. For a long time, he had lost the strength to continue fighting, and temporarily became a cripple among the divine emissaries. In this case, if he did not wait for his injuries to heal and forcibly use that violent power again, it might leave permanent irrecoverable damage, so he had to find a place far away from the conflict to quietly heal. And Amon had an agreement with him. I can let you go without killing you, and I can even give you a chance to free yourself from your mission. But you have to promise me one thing. When you feel that you have fully recovered, you can come to me for a public duel. Don't do any ambushes or assassinations. Come when you are confident, and in the meantime, you are not allowed to hurt my disciples or the people of Talung. So Bright Moon Knight came to this isolated island far away from the mainland, and spent a few years recuperating and recovering, and now he was just about to recover. On this day, when he was about to leave the island and fly to the continent, there was a sudden sound of something breaking in his soul, and a brand disappeared. This brand came from a soul contract, and he was different from the other divine emissaries under Enril. Not only did he receive the guidance of Enril to obtain the power of origin, but he was also equivalent to Enril's summon beast. As one of the two main gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, Enril had the achievement of the creator, and his mastery of various human magic had naturally reached the pinnacle. He himself was also a far more brilliant summoning magic master than Sylvia. His guidance to Bright Moon Knight was different from that to the other divine emissaries. He focused on teaching him how to cultivate and control that violent power, so that it merged with the body and mind, like the soul of a beast lurking in the human body. Enril also signed a soul contract with Bright Moon Knight, making him the most dangerous assassin on the continent under his command. This soul contract was the brand that merged with the body and mind. And now that the brand had suddenly disappeared, it could only mean one of three things. Either Enril had voluntarily given up the contract, or Bright Moon Knight had become strong enough to break through the shackles of the brand, or the god Enril had fallen. The dark wolf god Bright Moon Knight looked at the coastline in a daze. He naturally sensed that it was the third situation. But how was this possible? Bright Moon Knight seemed to be free, but he felt a sense of loss and trance in his soul. Sire of the Hittite kingdom, High Priest Walter hurried to the backyard of the shrine, to the quiet courtyard where his teacher Goliath lived. For some reason, the usually calm Supreme Mage forgot his proper etiquette, and almost trotted all the way into the courtyard. He stopped outside the door and said, "Teacher Goliath, I have something important to tell you." The door opened silently, obviously to let him in by himself. But Goliath did not speak. Warret stepped quickly over the threshold and into the house, but he was stunned. The old man who was revered by the whole nation, who was like a god in the hearts of the people, was silently kneeling on the ground, looking at an empty wall in the room, his shoulders trembling slightly, and his eyes closed, but tears were streaming down his face. Walter never dreamed that Goliath would cry, and cry so silently and sorrowfully. He did not dare to disturb his teacher, so he silently knelt beside him, waiting for Goliath to stop crying. This is the private reception room outside Goliath's bedroom, and the location is the backyard of the Shrine of Enril. according to the convention. For a priest like him, this wall should have reliefs or paintings of the gods. Otherwise, it would be against the rules of shrine architecture. But in Goliath's reception room, there was only an empty wall, nothing on it. In the whole kingdom, only the old man had enough authority to decorate the room and the shrine according to his own will. When the priests of the Hittite kingdom discussed this matter in private, not only did they not dare to accuse Goliath of being disrespectful to the gods, but in public, they would praise this supreme mage who had great virtue. They all said that the glory of the gods and the glory of Goliath had merged into one, and that the old man had reached a state where he did not need to rely on any external form to express himself. Although it could be said so, no other priest dared to imitate Goliath, because they were not Goliath. After a long time, Goliath finally stopped crying, took out a piece of soft white cotton from his sleeve and wiped his cheeks, his expression returning to calmness. He stood up and sat down at the table saying, "Walter, you don't have to be so alarmed, I already know what happened." The change in the statue of Enlil did not only happen in the shrine of Enlil, but also in all the shrines dedicated to the statue of Enlil on the continent. Since Faust was aware of it, how could Goliath, who was in Saya, not feel it? Walter's eyes were full of confusion. "Teacher, you already know?" "I'm not surprised, but how did this happen? It's too shocking." Goliath sighed and replied indifferently. 10 years ago, when the great flood destroyed the town of Duk and almost engulfed Saya, I was wondering if this day would come. But I didn't expect it to come so soon. Since the surviving youth of Duk can become a god, then why can't the god who destroyed Duk fall? Walter quietly asked through message magic. "Respected teacher, I understand your beliefs very well. Your body shines with the light of divinity. In that great flood, the real god was you, not Enlil. And now why are you crying for the fall of Enlil?" Goliath looked at him and replied, "Do you know why I sent Raphael to the plains of Duk and kept you by my side? You and Raphael are different in origin, and you act more steadily than him, but you are also more confused than him. My tears are like the flood of that year, for my old friend Nietzsche, and also for the fall of the god. Enlil's fate does not make me sad, but the fall of the god makes me mourn. While thinking of the days when you followed me, the faith that we guarded with half of our lives, the hope that millions of people guarded, Enlil symbolized all this, and will even continue to symbolize all this. His fall is enough to become the world's deep sorrow, and I am also crying for fate. The suffering that has already erupted in the continent will not stop because of this." The confusion in Walter's eyes deepened. "Respected teacher, from what you mean, you already know why Enlil fell. Did Ammonius cut him down?" Goliath nodded, then shook his head gently and said, "Yes, it was because of Ammon, but not because of Ammon. Ammonius' appearance heralded the fall of Enlil. But I know very well that Ammonius is not that powerful, at least not yet. The fall of Enlil is, in a sense, the same as the fall of Emperor Sinek. Sinek conquered the kingdom of Babylon, but it disappeared because of an arrow from Gilgamesh. The kingdom that believed in Enlil forced the kingdom that believed in Marduk to retreat, and the majesty of the god Enlil seemed to be about to reach its zenith, but in the end, because of his fall, everything became meaningless. The one who can cut him down and cut him down must be Marduk." Walter finally showed a look of understanding. "So that's how it is. It was Marduk who cut down Enlil, so will the god that Assyria and Hittite believe in change?" Chapter 259. 240 The Quest of the Creator. Walter thought for a moment before saying, "I see, Enlil will still be the main god that the kingdom believes in, even though this god has fallen. This may be ridiculous, but how long will it last?" Goliath sighed again. "I'm afraid it won't be long before the situation changes, and even if the world does not know, the Anunnaki gods will not sit idly by. If Anu, the father of the gods, really exists, he will definitely do something. But no matter what the gods do, a turbulent era has begun. I seem to see the legendary war of the gods from 1,000 years ago again. And the curtains are slowly opening again. If one day the Hittite kingdom falls into such an era again, Walter, please remember my advice and accept the guidance of Ammon. I can tell you, he is the one prophesied by the gods." There was a prophecy circulating among the gods of the continent, and only very few high priests like Goliath could read the records of those ancient books. It was said that when the plains of Duk, where the war of the gods had broken out, was restored from desolation, the god of the gods would appear from there. Ammon knew that legend, and Goliath had obviously read it as well. The plains of Duk became fertile again because of the great flood unleashed by Enlil. Enlil obviously thought that he would become the legendary god of the gods, but now he was the first of the gods to fall. Walter's expression became confused again. "Respected teacher, I understand what you are saying, but I don't understand why you are saying this." Goliath's voice sounded old and dignified, and he waved his hand and said, "One day you may understand, and when that time comes, I hope you will remember what I said today." The fall of Enlil not only caused a series of chain reactions in the mortal world, but also affected the divine realm in eternity beyond this world. Goliath said that Anu, the father of the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, must not sit back and watch, and would definitely do something. Just as he said this, the divine realm where the Anunnaki gods lived was experiencing the second tremor since the day it was born. This divine kingdom was created by Anu, the god of heaven, in his own spiritual world, from the eternal void. If one came to this divine kingdom, one would find that the mountains and rivers here were very similar to the Assyrian plateau in the north of the heaven's pivot continent. The mountain was towering and majestic, but it was not as desolate and barren as the human world. The top of the huge mountain was also covered in pure white snow, and the glaciers hanging down from the cliff were like crystal clear and beautiful ice sculptures. On the other hand, the valley and plains were full of vitality. Flowers bloomed like a brocade, and the green grass was like a carpet. From time to time, the cheerful chirping of birds could be heard. There were also large and small pearl-like lakes dotted with flowers and plants beside the lakes, and palace-like houses were clustered around them. This was the Saya Plateau, not the plateau seen in the human world, but the ideal Saya Plateau in the soul world. On the highlands, in the valleys, and in the lakes, there were all kinds of creatures, as well as happy and leisurely people. But they were not gods. It could be said that they were angels in a sense, or mortals in another sense. They did not grow old or die, and lived in peace and happiness in the eternal divine kingdom. These creatures were also created by Anu's soul world. But these creatures did not have the vision beyond that of Anu, the god of creation. As a part of the existence of the divine kingdom, they could not leave this divine kingdom. If the god of creation left, the world created by his soul would also disappear, and then all this would disappear with the departure of Anu, as if it had never existed. This carefree and peaceful world suddenly shook at this moment, and there was a faint aura of panic and destruction that was almost impossible to appear in the divine kingdom. This was not an earthquake, but a fluctuation caused by the destruction of time and space. Not to mention the creatures created by Anu. Even the real gods in the divine kingdom showed a look of horror. The source of the shaking was an invisible world in the divine kingdom. The world created by creator Enlil, which had collapsed and disappeared. If there was anything in common between the achievements of the creator and the god of creation, it was that the creator could also create a world of his own in eternity. As for what this world looked like, it depended on the wishes of the creator and the vision of the soul. But this world was closed, isolated, and could only be enjoyed by the creator himself. For the other gods, it was equivalent to not existing. According to the oath that the gods swore when they joined the divine system, when they had the achievement of the creator and created their own world, they must also integrate the cultivation knowledge contained in the creation of the world into the soul world of the god of creation, so that the god of creation could also gain more. The realm of the god of creation was higher than that of the creator. That the divine kingdom he created could not only accommodate the world of the creator, but also the gods who accepted guidance, so that everyone could have a paradise of eternal transcendence in the eternal world. Therefore, the world of the god of creation was also the world of the gods, not their own closed soul. But the god of creation did not obtain this achievement without a price. Creating a divine kingdom was equivalent to establishing a divine system, but he himself could not leave, and there was no need for him to leave again. This was his world. Just like the world in which mortals lived, everything was created by him. The world of the creator that Enlil had integrated into the divine kingdom of Anu suddenly collapsed. And although the gods could not see it, they could feel the vibration of the destruction of time and space. The gods realized that Enlil had fallen, and they also knew by whom Enlil had fallen. The moon god Nannar and the sun god Utu of the Anunnaki divine clan shouted at the same time. Anu, our father of the gods! Hurry up and calm the tremors of this divine kingdom. It has frightened those beautiful creatures. Another angry and sad voice shouted. Father of the gods, it was Marduk who killed Enlil. Does he want to provoke a new war of the gods? How can such behavior be tolerated? The speaker was the legendary son of Enlil, the storm god Adato, one of the divine messengers guided by Enlil, who had become a god. Another voice sounded unhurriedly. Adato, why do you only see what happened to Enlil, but not the fate that Enlil tried to impose on others? Amon never did anything to harm Enlil, but Enlil launched a flood that destroyed his home and wiped out his people. After Amon became a god, Enlil tried to kill him. Enlil fell while trying to kill Ammonius, and when he left the divine kingdom and decided to do so, he should have been prepared to suffer the same fate. His fall did not violate the covenant of the gods. The god who spoke was the legendary father of Marduk, Ea, the god of wisdom of the Anunnaki divine clan. In fact, he was the one who guided Marduk into the divine clan back then. Adato roared. But it was not Amon who killed Enlil, it was Marduk. Marduk has cut down my guide, my father. The moon god Nannar interjected. Adato, in the Anunnaki divine clan, there is only one god who can be called the father god, and that is our father of the gods, Anu. We all know Enlil's ambition, and it was this ambition that brought him to his death. He wanted to kill Amon. Do you think that Amon should have just stood there and been killed by him? If Enlil hadn't left the divine kingdom to kill Amon, there wouldn't have been the result of Marduk killing him. Can someone who has transcended eternal life still not see through it? Ea, the god of wisdom who had just stopped Adato, said at this moment. Nannar, you know that Murin will help you, so you are inclined towards Amon. But I always feel that the god is an indescribable threat. His existence may break the covenant that has been observed by the divine clans for thousands of years, and push us all into an unknown fate, but I can't see it clearly. The Anunnaki gods were arguing when something suddenly unfolded in the sky above the plateau. It looked like a golden scroll, densely written with divine characters. Looking closely, each stroke in the divine characters was composed of smaller divine characters, and looking more closely, these smaller divine characters were also of the same structure. The strokes composed of smaller divine characters seemed to be in an endless cycle. The scroll unfolded with golden light, containing the rules that created the world, with a powerful force that even the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers could not resist. The tremors in the divine kingdom, including the aura of destruction of time and space, disappeared in an instant, and peace was restored. The gods heard an old and majestic voice. The person who will provoke the war of the gods is not Amon. Enlil's actions have provoked a civil war among the divine clans. And after Marduk killed him, what will be provoked is a larger war between the divine clans. Ea, the god of wisdom, do you know how powerful the Marduk you have received is now? Marduk has long had the achievements of the creator, but he did not open up a world of his own in the divine kingdom. Instead, he cultivated again and again in the human world. When he killed Enlil, I felt the breakthrough in power in the imprint left by the Book of Destiny. Not only has he become stronger than me, but he has now broken through the achievement of the creator. Nannar exclaimed. How is this possible? Ea answered Anu's question. There was a tinge of sorrow and desolation in his tone. I have expected this day to come, but I did not expect that it would come in such a way. Enlil might have made the most foolish choice. Nannar, if you want to know whether Marduk has broken through the achievement of the creator, you only need to see if he will come here to explain his actions. According to the oath of joining the divine clan, if you kill a god, you must explain to the creator why everything happened. If he does not come, it means that he has left the divine clan. At this moment, Nannar suddenly shouted, Murin, have you finally come to the divine kingdom from the human world? Marduk did not come, but Murin did. The place where she appeared was the corresponding location of the palace of Murin on the human world on the Assyrian plateau in the Divine Kingdom, where there was also a divine palace belonging to her. Murin appeared in the Divine Kingdom of Anunnaki, and then said to the golden book that shrouded the sky, "I am here to explain to Anu about Amon. He was ambushed by Enlil on his way to the rose garden to see me. Enlil not only wanted to kill him with his own hands, but also sent his divine emissaries to monitor my movements outside the rose garden." She spoke like a mortal in the Divine Kingdom, but her voice naturally carried all kinds of complex information, and the gods could understand the cause and effect clearly. Anu's voice came from the sky again. "If I were still here, I would very much like to see that Ammonius." The gods were stunned. Anu obviously meant that he was no longer in the Divine Kingdom, but how was this possible? As the creator, he could not leave the Divine Kingdom, or the world would disappear. If Anu was no longer here, then who was speaking? The voice coming from the sky was clearly Anu's voice, which could not be imitated or disguised, and the gods could naturally distinguish it. The words were also accompanied by a complex piece of information. What unfolded in the sky was the holy relic of the Anunnaki divine clan, the Scroll of Destiny. According to the legends of the human world, the holder of this thing could control the entire divine clan. In fact, it recorded all the spiritual imprints and cultivation insights contained in the creation of this divine kingdom by Anu. Not only that, but the Scroll of Destiny also recorded the insights of the various gods into the divine kingdom. It was a dynamic imprint that contained all the information of this divine kingdom. Before the War of the Gods, Anu had given the Scroll of Destiny to Tiamat. This was an important inheritance, which was tantamount to telling Tiamat the secrets of the creation of the divine kingdom and Anu's own cultivation achievements. Soon after that, the War of the Gods broke out. Marduk killed Tiamat and obtained the Scroll of Destiny, and Enlil also wanted this holy relic, but Marduk returned it to Anu. This was the beginning of the break between the two gods. There were two reasons why Marduk did not keep the Scroll of Destiny in his hands. First of all, his purpose was to read the secrets of the Anunnaki divine kingdom recorded in the Scroll of Destiny, and understand the mysteries of cultivation in the realm of the Creator. And this purpose had been achieved. Second, he found that although he had obtained the Scroll of Destiny, he could not really control it, as Anu could take it back at any time. Marduk, without the guidance of the divine clan, comprehended the power of origin on his own, and became a god who transcended eternal life. His desire to join the Anunnaki divine clan was not the same as that of other gods, which was to explore the secrets of the Creator, and even to pursue a higher realm. Understanding the secrets of cultivation did not mean that one could succeed. Later, Marduk broke through the realm of the Creator, but still continued to pursue the realm of the Creator. Anu was aware of Marduk's vow back then, and Marduk was not even willing to be a creator like Anu. He wanted to create his own divine clan, and did not want to be bound by the divine kingdom. But the prerequisite for surpassing a certain realm was to witness this realm, and Marduk had been accumulating in constant cultivation. In fact, Anu also had his own purpose in creating the Scroll of Destiny. He also wanted to leave the Anunnaki divine kingdom, but he could not let the divine kingdom disappear. So he wanted to create something, the Scroll of Destiny, which contained all the knowledge and imprints of the creation of this divine kingdom, and then use his own soul to refine it, eventually hoping to use the Scroll of Destiny to replace the existence of the Creator. This was an attempt by Anu, and it was the path of cultivation that he continued to explore after becoming the Creator. When he gave the Scroll of Destiny to Tiamat, he more or less hoped that Tiamat, who controlled the Scroll of Destiny, could replace him and allow the Anunnaki divine kingdom to continue to exist after he left. But the battle of the gods disrupted this plan of Anu's. When Marduk returned the Scroll of Destiny, Anu realized what he wanted to do, and as the creator of the Anunnaki divine clan, he had a hunch that the day Marduk succeeded, the existence of the Anunnaki divine clan would be greatly threatened. Anu wanted to leave the Anunnaki divine kingdom even more, and go to the mortal world to stop the disaster of Anunnaki. He had practiced the Scroll of Destiny for nearly 1,000 years, and finally he could do one thing, That was, he could use the scroll of destiny to replace himself, and he himself could return to the mortal world. That was to say, Anu had left the divine kingdom nearly 100 years ago, and no one knew where he went in the form of a new soul. This was a major breakthrough in his cultivation as a god of creation, but it was also a challenge. At this moment, it was Anu's voice speaking in the divine kingdom, but it was not Anu himself. He had refined the scroll of destiny into one with this divine kingdom, and as long as he did not fall, this divine kingdom would exist forever. The scroll of destiny contained all the cultivation knowledge and spiritual imprints left by Anu as a creator, and it could communicate with the gods, but it was not Anu's current thinking. None of the Anunnaki gods knew about this, and 100 years on the mortal world was very short in the divine kingdom. It was not until today when Marduk beheaded Enlil, and used this as an opportunity to break through the realm of the creator, and become one with the divine kingdom, that the scroll of destiny spoke, and the spiritual imprint left by Anu in it explained his whereabouts to the gods. If Amon were here, he would be very interested in this matter, because as far as he knew, there had been more than one god who had tried to pursue the realm of the creator. To break through this realm, one had to pass a test, and even lose their eternal life. Goddess Isis failed, but Zeus of the Olympian divine clan succeeded. Anu must have understood the possible consequences of doing so, so he adopted another way to bypass the test, which was to spend 1,000 years refining the magical scroll of destiny. It seemed that he had succeeded, but it also proved that the test could not be avoided. Although Anu left the scroll of destiny and went to the mortal world, what was reborn in the mortal world was an almost blank soul. After Anu left the divine kingdom and went to the mortal world, there were only two ways for him to come back. The first was to end his life in the mortal world. The second was to start all over again and pass all the tests to become a god who transcended eternal life again. His current situation was very similar to that of Batet back then, except that he did not know what the result would be. It was possible that he had gone to the mortal world in vain, and would eventually return with nothing. Chapter 260. 241. The Bible. Until today, Anu had not returned, which meant that if he had become a new living creature in the human world, he should still be alive now, nearly 100 years ago. His identity may be human or other living creatures, but he would never know that he was Anu, living in the world like other living creatures and starting over again. But deep in his soul he carried Anu's vow when he left the divine realm. What would have happened to such a deity in the human world? What kind of story would have happened to him? It could only be said that it was wonderful. Murin came to the divine realm to explain to Anu about Enlil's attempt to kill Amon, but was beheaded by Marduk. But unexpectedly the voice left by Anu in the Book of Destiny replied with such words, which surprised the gods. It was not until today that they learned that Anu had left. Enlil, one of the two main gods in the Anunnaki divine realm, had fallen, and the other main god, Marduk, did not come to the divine realm to explain to Anu, indicating that he had obviously broken through the achievement of the god of creation, and was freed from the oath of joining the divine clan. As for whether Marduk had become another god of creation, or had broken through to a higher realm than the god of creation, the gods did not know. The current situation of the Anunnaki divine clan was equivalent to the disappearance of the god of creation, and the two main gods of the divine realm were also gone. This was something that had never happened since the birth of the divine clan, and the gods were at a loss for a moment. And Anu seemed to have expected that today's situation might happen before he left, and the voice in the Book of Destiny said again, "The life of a living creature is very short, and I may be back soon. On the day I return, Murin, I hope you can invite Amon to see me. I would like to talk to him." About 3 months after the fall of Enlil, Amon quietly came to the rose garden of Yun-Namna. The dozen or so divine emissaries under Murin, except for Shebra, had now returned to this divine palace, and took the initiative to open the door to welcome Ammonius' arrival, and told him that the goddess Amon had been waiting for him. Amon's face was a little pale, just like a mortal who had fallen ill. There were also traces of weakness. As he walked towards the palace at the foot of the mountain, he saw Wendy among the flowers. When Wendy saw Amon, she stood in the garden by the stream and waved to him. She shouted cheerfully. My God, I have been waiting for you. I will use the most beautiful flowers to welcome you. Are these flowers beautiful? They were all planted by me. Only in this kind of divine palace can such beautiful flowers be cultivated. As Amon approached, he turned around inadvertently. He had already regained his usual demeanor and appearance. There was no trace of weakness at all. He came to the flowers with a smile and said, It's really beautiful. I've never seen such beautiful flowers, but you're even more beautiful than these flowers. Wendy blushed and said with her head lowered, The goddess is waiting for you, and she seems to be in a hurry. Please go in quickly. I will accompany you to enjoy the flowers when I have time. Yun Namna's eyes were sharp, and Amon could not hide his weakness in front of her. The goddess tugged at his sleeve as soon as she saw him and asked, You're injured, who did it? Enril or Marduk? Amon smiled bitterly. Of course it was Enril. One must pay a price to lure him into the trap. How could I get away unscathed? But it's worth it. He has fallen and my father and Crazy Ol can rest in peace. As for Marduk, I have an agreement with him that no matter what identity he appears in, he cannot take the initiative to hurt me, nor can he order his divine emissaries to attack me. Murin snorted and said, Do you think Marduk is being kind to you? He won't attack you himself, but he would love to borrow Enril's hand to cut you down or severely injure you. You're lucky enough to be where you are now. Don't go anywhere during this time, and you must not leave the rose garden before you recover from your injuries. Amon smiled. Of course I won't go anywhere. Although I'm injured, I've also fulfilled my wish for many years, and I've gained something. Do you know? I even vaguely understand the path of cultivation of the Creator. And I want to practice for a while to understand those feelings clearly so that I can verify them in the future. Yun Namna looked at him, blinked her beautiful eyes and said meaningfully, It's actually not difficult to understand the path of cultivation of the Creator. I've had some insights for many years, and I was looking for an opportunity to have a good exchange with you. What's really difficult is the process of practice and verification, which is the same as things in the human world. Sometimes you know what to do to achieve a certain achievement, but it's not easy to actually do it. Amon reached out and put his arm around her shoulder. Because I'm not a god of the Anunnaki divine clan, we rarely discuss cultivation issues together. And now we have a chance to verify each other's insights. My goddess of youth and love, what you have verified must be clearer than what I have. Yun Namna finally smiled and leaned against Amon's chest. That's not necessarily true. You were a very special person before you became a god. And now you are a very special god. The cultivation of the gods also runs through from beginning to end. And if there is still a will after transcending eternal life, you can realize that this path has long existed. The achievement of the Creator, the ability to open up a world of their own in the immortal eternity, everything comes from the spiritual imprint and the knowledge of cultivation. This foundation was laid long before becoming a god, and when passing the test of endless life and death. Without this source, there is no way to talk about the achievement of the Creator out of nothing. And the way to pass the test of endless life and death is related to each person's experience, and the ups and downs you experienced on the continent. Looking back, the course of life is so ups and downs, so colorful. Many divine emissaries could not have had what you have experienced before they became gods. And the title of Mortal Emperor Killer is enough to show your uniqueness. When you and I exchange our own insights, I may even take advantage of you more. The achievements of the gods often cannot be measured by time. And if you enjoy that eternal comfort in the divine kingdom, there will be no change even after 1,000 years. And the achievement of the gods does not mean the level of magic power, but the difference in the way and rules of using power. And this is the real breakthrough. Amon listened quietly, and as Yun Namna spoke, it was naturally accompanied by information imprinted in his soul, explaining the complex and esoteric meaning. The mutual verification of information between the gods could happen at any time, and it did not mean that they had to sit down and talk to each other like a negotiation. As long as it was imprinted in the soul, it would not be forgotten, and it only depended on whether it could be truly verified in cultivation. When Yun Namna finished, Amon said softly, "Thank you for telling me this. It is exactly what I lack in experience. After all, I have just become a god not long ago, and there are many things that I am still experiencing and thinking about. When I came, I found that you had gathered all the divine emissaries under you to the rose garden, and you seemed to be very nervous. Did something happen again? Yun Namna suddenly sighed and reached out to grab Amon's arm, like an ivy encountering a big tree that she could rely on, and said with her head down, "Something unexpected has happened, and it is related to the fate of the entire Anunnaki divine clan. Marduk has left the divine clan, and the other king god has been killed by him, and the god of creation, Anu, has left the divine kingdom and gone missing." As she spoke, she had imprinted what had happened in the divine kingdom of Anunnaki into Amon's soul, and not only did she explain everything clearly, but this information also contained instructions on how to enter the divine kingdom of Anunnaki. Although Amon was not a god of this divine clan, the voice that Anu had left in the scroll of destiny had already spoken, saying that he wanted to invite Amon to enter the divine kingdom in the future to meet him. Amon was also surprised to hear the news, and he immediately explained to Murin what he knew about Zeus and Isis, frowning and asking, "Could it be that Anu wants to avoid the test and break through in another way? Why do I feel like this is a detour?" And Marduk broke through and became a god of creation after killing Enlil. Why do I feel like he is more than just a god of creation? As far as I know, Marduk has more than one title of god, Murin replied. Marduk enjoyed the titles of 50 gods in the sacrifices of the kingdom of Babylon, and an ordinary priest's tongue would cramp after reading them all. Amon shook his head and said, "Not among these 50 names. It should be the name of a god from another divine clan. There is at least one name I know, but I have to abide by the agreement not to say it." And when Moses and the others returned to the plains of Duk, they were tempted by a god who called himself Bakri, and I heard that Bakri was the name of the god worshipped by the East Baz Empire of the continent. I suspect that he is probably Marduk. Murin had a melancholy look on her face. Whether Anu took a detour or not, you can only guess, and you can't really experience his realm. But Marduk did break through and become a god of creation. And as for what kind of achievement he obtained, it will soon become clear. Now that the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan are without a leader, except for the god of wisdom, Ea, who can still keep his composure, the rest of the gods have lost their backbone. I also feel uneasy, so I summoned all the divine emissaries to the rose garden. Amon hugged her, stroked her back and said, "The god of creation is the one who guides the divine clan, and even if he is not here, you have not lost the guidance to become a god, so there is no need to be at a loss. You said that the gods are without a leader, but I am more concerned about another question. After Enlil falls, what will happen to the emissaries under him?" Yun Namna replied, "This is also similar to the situation after the War of the Gods back then, and the situation of the emissaries under Enlil is similar to that of the 9 monsters back then. They can leave the divine clan, but they must keep their promise not to reveal the secrets of the divine clan. If there is a god who continues to guide them in place of Enlil, they can still stay in the divine clan and become an emissary under another god." At this point, Yun Namna raised her head worriedly and said, "As far as I know, some of the emissaries have left the divine clan, just like the Scorpion King back then. But there is also a group of emissaries who have accepted the guidance of the god of storms, Kibir, the god of flames, and Nugus, the god of ashes, who have a grudge against you, have become the emissaries under Adato. In the Anunnaki divine clan, Adato became a god under the guidance of Enlil, and he regards Enlil as his father god. Even if he cannot afford to provoke Marduk, he will definitely come to you. Adato's combat power is quite strong, and he has gathered such a group of powerful emissaries. You must be careful." Amon sneered. Adato, the god of storms, the son of Enlil in the myths and legends. The official name of the Assyrian giant legion is called the Adato Legion, which really fulfills the name of the enemy. But I have never seen this god, and it is possible that he has not come to the mortal world since the day I was born, so it is impossible for me to provoke him. If he wants to cause trouble for me, I won't be polite. I haven't even been afraid of Enlil, so why would I be afraid of him?" Yun Namna waved her fist and hit him lightly. "I didn't say you should be polite, I just want you to be careful. Although Adado's combat power is not as good as Enrol's, he is stronger than you." Amon smiled slightly. "I am injured now, and I will naturally not leave the Rose Garden before I recover. But cooperating with Marduk to slay Enrol is not without gain. I have learned more and will be stronger than before." A year passed unknowingly. A year's time was very short for the gods, and it was almost no different from a short day in the eternal divine realm. But for a god like Amon, it was a rare time in the mortal world. After he became a god, he hardly had any rest, and it was not until the fall of Enrol that he entered Unamna's Rose Garden to rest with his injuries. No mortal knew how Amon spent the year in the Rose Garden, and when he reappeared in front of the disciples, it was as if nothing had changed from yesterday, but the invisible aura was clearly much stronger than before, and the look in his eyes had become deeper. During the year that Amon stayed in the Rose Garden, the events of the mortal world continued to happen as countless historical events had happened before. The city of Salem ushered in its golden years since its founding, reaching unprecedented prosperity. With Usur and Titsho, two talents in handling military and political affairs, Aesop was also a lot more relaxed. The slave-born governor now devoted more energy to his early hobbies, and began to collect the various myths and legends of the continent. Aesop did not travel far, and what he collected and sorted out was not ancient stories, but the legends about Ammonius that he had seen and heard in recent years. The people of Salem believed in Ammonius, but as a newly born god, Amon could not compare with the ancient gods in one respect. He had not yet left behind a scripture that formed a faith faction, and these should have been organized by the believers on earth. What Aesop was now going to organize was a scripture formed by Ammonius' oracles, miracles, and hymns dedicated to him by his believers. After Moses' departure, the new leader of the Dishans, Joshua, had become an old friend of Aesop. Inspired by Aesop, he was doing the same thing, organizing the scriptures for Allah, whom the Dishans believed in. Allah's oracles, miracles, and hymns were easy to collect, and they were all related to the personal experiences of the Dishans. When Joshua compared the information he had collected with the stories of Ammonius compiled by Aesop, the two found that many of the contents overlapped, and some of the stories even overlapped. The two gods were sometimes like one god. Allah only appeared when he guided the Dishans back to their homeland, but this event itself contained the story of Ammonius. When it came to Allah's miracles, Ammon could not be avoided, whether it was Supreme General Ammon or Ammonius today. It was Ammon who took the Dishans to his territory, and created an opportunity for them to leave, and it was Ammon who ordered Aesop and Link to build the city of Salem to welcome them. If Allah appeared as a god, guiding the hope and faith of the Dishans, then Ammon appeared as a mortal, creating all kinds of conditions and help for the Dishans, like two sides of a certain force. Aesop knew the inside story, but it was not convenient for him to say it, and with Joshua's cleverness he vaguely guessed something. When the believers in the mortal world talked about the legends of the gods, they often had an unwitting habit. They unknowingly transferred all kinds of magical deeds that were circulating on the continent to the gods they believed in. Moreover, they even went through ingenious processing. By doing so, it was not only to put gold on the faces of the gods, but also to make themselves more glorious. In the eyes of the gods, doing so might be boring, but people always had this habit, consciously or unconsciously. The people of Duk enjoyed a high status in the city of Salem, and the reason was simple, because they were once the owners of this land, and Ammonius, whom the city of Salem believed in, was once a Duk miner. According to the believers' self-assertive explanation, Ammonius appeared on earth as a Duk miner to save the world. In this way, the people of Duk seemed to have become people who had been with the gods, and their status had become invisibly honorable. Their self-perception was more or less the same. Although they believed in the one and only God, Allah, and they were subconsciously proud of the fact that many others in Salem believed in Ammonius. The people settled in Salem, occupied the best land, were respected, and possessed superb skills. When they were no longer burdened with the suffering of their ancestors, their strength and wisdom became the wealth left by their ancestors, and made them the richest people in Salem. The advantages they had were naturally incomparable to those of the cavemen, the highland giants, and the wanderers from all over the continent. The girls were willing to marry the people of Duk, and now they had their own descendants. When the people told the story of the one and only God, Allah, to their children, they unknowingly made up many of the miracles that Aman had performed. What was more interesting was that when they retold the experience of walking out of Igut, the story gradually changed. For example, the divine emissaries of the Ennead had used various means to stop them, once putting the people in a desperate situation. The truth may have damaged the glory of Allah, so in the story, there was another interpretation, the story of Allah performing miracles to punish the people of Igut. Chapter 261. He-Ming should know what Aesop and Joshua were up to, and what kind of stories were circulating among the people, but this was not something he wanted to know. The angels in the Garden of Eden were also aware of these things, and they found it very interesting, especially Link, who had nothing better to do than to make up stories with Aesop when he was in Lung. Of course, there were also military and political affairs. After Lorad became the governor of Enril, his first task was to replenish the giant legion and organize a larger logistics team. All of this was carried out using the influence of the Lorad family, and the recruitment of manpower and supplies was a task that offended many people. This was no longer the era of Emperor Sinek. If Enril was in a position to win, there would naturally be people willing to contribute to the cause. However, the current situation of Enril was obviously not optimistic. After the city of Lung became strong and prosperous, it adopted a strategy of Cold War. Not only did it take back the traditional mines belonging to the Dutians, but it also opened new mines along the Saya Plateau, gradually encroaching on the strategic space of Enlil City, and forming a situation of outflanking it from the rear. The sphere of influence of Lung was getting closer and closer to the supply route through the Saya Plateau to Enril. Once there was a conflict, it would be easy to cut off their reinforcements. In fact, Enril was being watched so closely that it could not move at all. Enril also gained land, but its production was only enough to sustain the survival of the citizens. More strategic resources still needed to be replenished from Assyria. Enril was built as an offensive stronghold, and it could only play its role during expansion. But when the strategic situation changed, maintaining defense became a pointless consumption. Well, it would be a pity to give up, but not giving up would not bring them any benefits. Instead, they would have to suffer losses every day. Lung was not in a hurry to start a war. It only adopted a strategy of blockade and restriction, and naturally, it would be able to make Enril last until the day it could not stand it anymore. The divine emissaries in the Garden of Eden also had the rare leisure time since they followed Aman. This year was very happy and peaceful, and there was another divine emissary, Rulio. Rulio had long wanted to enter the Garden of Eden, but it was not until Ammonius returned from the Rose Garden that he officially accepted the guidance. Rulio entered the Garden of Eden after he was freed from his status as a summoned beast. This was related to another joyous event, which was Michael Hyaming marrying Princess Cilia. How could a supreme mage, a noble princess of a kingdom, marry a man of unknown origin? Logically speaking, such a marriage would be opposed by the Hittite royal family. But Sylvia was very straightforward. She sent a letter to King Asher, the contents of which were as follows. I want to marry Michael Hemmings. He is an emissary under the guidance of Aman. If you object, I will ask Ammonius to speak to you personally. When King Asher saw this letter, he immediately sent an emissary, not only agreeing to the marriage, but also sending a generous dowry. In his opinion, as an emissary of the gods, Siegel's status was worthy of a princess. On the other hand, Asher did not dare to let Ammonius personally come to talk to him. Aman now had the title of Mortal Emperor Killer, and whether this was a joke or not, Asher, who had become king, would rather believe it than not, and naturally did not dare to test the miracle of this god with his own body. Once Sylvia got married, she would become Lady Siegel, but the surname Siegel represented her birth, and Sylvia was a human, not a seagull, so she gave herself the surname Ruashue. The meaning was obvious. If Michael was a seagull, then she was like the waves that held up the seagull, and her name in the Garden of Eden was Sylvia Ruashue. Link was a person who liked to follow the fashion. Born as a caveman, he naturally did not have a surname, so he claimed that his surname was Link, and then gave himself the name Uriel, calling himself Link Uriel. When Seagull married Sylvia, she made a request, and that was to undo the soul contract with Rulio, freeing the charm mermaid from her status as a summoned beast. When Rulio came to the continent to become Sylvia's summoned beast, he was willing. Otherwise, with his strength, it would have been difficult for Sylvia to subdue and sign a soul contract with him. Now that Seagull had asked Sylvia to release Rulio, Rulio was willing. After all, their circumstances were different. The first thing Rulio did when he came to the Garden of Eden was to also cultivate the pair of angel wings. When he summoned white wings in the form of a young man, it was naturally very good-looking, but when he revealed his original form as a charm mermaid with those big wings, it looked a little funny. But Rulio did not feel that he looked funny, because there was still Elmar at the bottom. Since ancient times, have you ever seen an ironback flying in the sky with its wings spread? Today, there was a mermaid flying next to it, and they all had the same wings. These two grotesque angels flew out of the Garden of Eden, flapped their wings and flew over the Euphrates River Valley, landed on the edge of the mountains and returned to their normal appearance, and happened to stop a person. It was the dark wolf god Minji of the Anunnaki divine clan. After the fall of Enlil, Minji also faced a new choice. Should she leave the divine clan, or accept the guidance of another god? For the divine emissaries, of course, they hoped to continue to stay in the divine clan and receive guidance. Kibir, the god of fire, the god of Grey Nugus, and others all accepted the guidance of the god of storm, Adato, and remained the divine emissaries of the Anunnaki divine clan. On the other hand, the power that Minji trained in was very special. It was a violent power that could be transformed and controlled by a god into one's body and mind, and it must be guided in order to continue training. After the fall of Enlil, the origin of that inexplicable trap was finally found out, and it turned out to be set up by Minji back then. Minji failed to assassinate Amon twice, and was still 1 point away from success. He was beaten into a cripple and did not play any role in the important battle later on, and was despised by Adato. Minji became a divine emissary exiled by the divine clan. And who in this world could guide him? And he also heard that Adato was resentful and might punish him, so who in this world could protect him? The dark wolf god could only think of Ammonius. And other than the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, he had only dealt with this god. Minji remembered the agreement he had with Amon, and so he came to the city of Talung to pray to Ammonius. Because Amon had promised that when Minji recovered to his peak state, he could come to him again for a duel, but before that, Minji was not allowed to hurt Amon's disciples and the people of Talung. This was a chance that Amon had given him to free himself from his mission. Minji abided by this agreement, but used this as an opportunity to summon Amon and request to give up the duel, hoping to receive Amon's guidance. He had fought with Amon before and knew that Amon also mastered that violent power, and now that Amon had become a god, it meant that Amon understood the path to ultimate transcendence through the cultivation of this power, and the only person who could guide him was probably Ammonius. Amon happened to leave the Rose Garden and return to the Garden of Eden, and heard Minji's prayer, so he sent 2 disciples to see him. After seeing Minji, Elmar tilted his head and looked at him for a long time, then said angrily, "You are that dark wolf god, known as the #1 assassin on the continent? It was because of you that I drilled in the charcoal marsh for more than half a month, but unfortunately I couldn't find you. Since you have assassinated Ammonius before, you still have the face to ask for his guidance today?" Rulio also shouted from the side. "Back then, I was also sent to guard the trade route of the charcoal marsh, just to guard against people like you causing trouble. I worked hard for more than half a year." Minji hurriedly bowed and apologized. "What I did back then has caused trouble for the 2 of you. I am willing to make up for it with my future actions. Today I came to ask for Ammonius' forgiveness, and swear to accept his guidance, and become Ammonius' oracle like the 2 of you." There is one thing you don't know. I am not only an oracle guided by Enlil, but I also signed a soul contract with him like a summoned beast. Assassinating Ammonius was Enlil's order, not my original intention. Upon hearing this, Rulio showed some sympathy, but Elmar still scolded with a straight face. This does not absolve you of your guilt. You did it, so you have to bear the consequences. You cannot be absolved of your responsibility just because someone instructed you. It is understandable that you had no choice, but it does not mean that it did not happen. Ammonius asked us to ask you, why did you make such a request? Minji Yuyi replied, what I practice is a violent power, like a beast lurking in my body and mind that will explode at any time. And now only Ammonius can guide me. As far as I know, only he can truly master the mystery of this power. Elmar sneered. Only Ammonius can guide the power you practice, but that is your own business. It has nothing to do with Ammonius. Ammonius can also guide others. Why you? Rulio asked in a low voice. Minji Yuyi, Ammonius also asked us to ask you another question. If he refuses, what are you going to do? Minji Yuyi could not hide the disappointment and regret in her eyes, and she prostrated in the direction of the Euphrates River Valley. Ammonius, even if you refuse my request, I still want to ask for your forgiveness. I also have one more thing to tell you this time. God Kibir and Nugus have both accepted Adato's guidance. I know them, because they have hurt you before, so they are even more afraid of your existence, and are tempting Adato to continue to be your enemy. At this moment, Amon's figure suddenly appeared and said, thank you for bringing me this news and kind reminder, although I already know. If you want to ask for my forgiveness, then do one thing for me, come with me. Seeing Ammonius appear in person, Elmar and Rulio both retreated to the side, and Amon ordered the two divine emissaries to return to the Garden of Eden, while he left with Minji Yuyi. Amon did not intend to meet the Dark Wolf God, but because of another matter, he changed his mind at the last minute, and decided to take Minji Yuyi to meet another person. Cain, the supreme mage of the Kingdom of Babylon, did not expect that Cynic would be assassinated. Fortunately, although he had been bribed by the Assyrian Empire in an attempt to frame Prince Benut for Gakate's assassination of Princess Sisela, this matter was not exposed in the end. After Prince Benut succeeded to the throne, not only was Gakate not punished, but he also became one of the 3 high priests of the kingdom. On the surface, Cain had always supported Benut, and Gakate had also recommended Cain to King Benut I. Now was a time of need, and a supreme mage like Cain, who was born among the common people, did not have a complicated background, so he should be promoted by the new king. Benut I approved all of Gakate's other recommendations, but he did not express his opinion on the recommendation of promoting Cain. Cain waited for a long time for the opportunity to meet with Benut I alone. Benut I praised him verbally for his achievements and said many words of praise and encouragement. Finally, he asked him to carry out a task, and if he completed it well, he would naturally receive the reward he deserved. Reward. This task was similar to the one that Amon had accepted in the Temple of Isis, which was to visit the plains of Duk, but in a different way. Simply put, Benut I was going to send a delegation of emissaries to the cities of Budamia and Meso on the borders of the Hittite kingdom, accompanied by representatives of various trading companies in Hittite. This was naturally also an activity to promote trade, and to examine the various opportunities for cooperation between the two countries was very symbolic in terms of diplomacy. The last stop of the delegation was also the city of Talang, which was their real destination. Now, the tables had turned, and the area around Talang had become the most important producer of refined iron and parangons on the continent. It also had the best craftsmen on the continent, and many of the products were currently needed by the Hittite kingdom. The delegation was led by a diplomat, and Cain was the priest who followed the delegation. His position was very noble and special, and he was responsible for supervising the activities of all the members of the delegation. Benut I also gave him another task, which was to inspect the customs of the plains of Duk and the development of the various cities. Important information about the development of each city was recorded with divine spells. At the thought that Talang was Ammonius' territory, a secret that had been hidden in Cain's heart for many years was touched. He instinctively did not want to go, but Benut I had given the order, and he had to accept the task. Along the way, Cain's delegation was received very politely, and even when they reached Talang, nothing unusual happened. What he was worried about did not happen. After the visit and the completion of the task, the delegation left Talang, and Cain finally breathed a sigh of relief. When they left the plains of Duk, crossed the Euphrates River and returned to the kingdom of Babylon, Cain was finally completely relieved. It seemed that Ammonius' friends had either forgotten about him, or they did not pay attention to him at all. After crossing the Euphrates River, it was still 3 days' journey to the main city of Kish. The next night, the delegation rested in the town of Akkad, where Ammon and Medanzo had been. As a high priest of the kingdom and a supreme mage, Cain naturally stayed in the best room of the shrine in the town. That night, Cain still persisted in his daily meditation and training as usual. There seemed to be a power in his blood that was ready to stir. This was a power that he had discovered and mastered on his own after Ammon had left. Although Ammon did not continue to teach him the power of two sides, Cain also guessed the truth when he heard that Ammon was a god. In fact, Ammon was a mortal who had become a god through practice, and not a god who had come to the human world as people had said. He had also been taught by Ammon in the past, so the path he was exploring might also lead to the realm of immortality. Immortality had become Cain's vow. As soon as he felt the power surging in his blood, as if it contained some kind of thirst, he suddenly heard a voice in his soul. "Cain, do you still remember me?" This voice was unforgettable for Cain. The speaker was the sorcerer he and Abel had helped in the farm, and also the savior of the two brothers and all the people on the boat on the Euphrates River, Ammon. Ammon taught them the power of two sides, and left after they had awakened it. Later, the two brothers were appointed by the city of Uruk as mages, and they also joined Gilgamesh's guards. The guards trained by Gilgamesh were all ordinary nobles who had declined, and all of them were advanced mages. Gilgamesh taught them to practice low-level body arts like warriors, so that they could become knights who could carry weapons and charge. They were a formidable force on the battlefield. Since Cain and Abel practiced the power of two sides, after becoming advanced mages, they naturally also had the achievements of advanced body arts. They did not reveal this secret, but they performed extremely well in the guards and were praised and valued by Gilgamesh. At the same time, they also became priests of the Uruk shrine. In the Battle of Kenmit, the Igut army led by Ammon had a fierce battle with the Uruk legion led by Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh's guards charged at Ammon's personal guards. After a round of battle, the cavalry regrouped. Cain was safe and sound, but Abel was lying in a pool of blood. Before the battle, the two brothers had an argument because they knew that the commander of the other side was their savior, Ammon. They had a secret, the secret of practicing the power of two sides. In a chaotic battle of 10,000 people, the fall of one person might not be noticeable, and it was even difficult to tell whose sword or spear Abel was killed by in the chaos. But Ammon noticed the two brothers at the time, and later carefully observed the scene in the battlefield information recorded by the priests. The scene was very chaotic, and he could not see clearly. When Ammon became a god, everything that he had experienced in this life was so clear that he could even observe everyone he knew and everything he had experienced, like a replay. This was the difference between gods and mortals. Ammon finally confirmed one thing. Abel was secretly ambushed by his brother when he was charging, and that was the main reason why he died. At that time, almost no one on the battlefield could see clearly. You're tuning into the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.